You've just found the ultimate guide to IELTS speaking. This is the longest, most detailed guide to IELTS speaking you'll find anywhere on the internet. It's going to help you understand things about the format of the test, how you can improve your speaking at home for free, and give you the same strategies thousands of my students have used to get a band 9 on the speaking test. Not only that, we're also going to give you the same grammar and vocabulary that we've only ever shared with our band 9 VIP students before. And then at the end of the video, we're going to do something very, very special. We're going to share a mock test that we've never shared before. It's from a student who you might have seen before, where she got a band 8. We've showed her lots of the things included in this video, and then we invited her back to our studio to see if she could improve from a band 8 to a band 9. But let's start by helping you understand the 3 different parts of the speaking test and share with you those strategies that our band 9 students have used to succeed. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So let's start off by going through the 3 different parts of the IELTS speaking test and also tell you the characteristics of a band 5 to 6.5 student versus a band 7, 8 or 9 student. The vast majority of the candidates that the examiner will see will be in and around these scores. These are the average scores, and vast majority of examiners are seeing things like this. And these students do very particular things that are very easy for the examiners to spot. They are very, very different from band 7, 8 and 9 students. So what we're going to do is first of all go through each part and tell you what these things are that these students do, and then show you one of our students, and you can decide whether they are doing these things here or these things. So part 1, normally the easiest part, but it is where a lot of students mess up and they do a few things that are very avoidable. The most common thing that examiners hear and see is a memorized answer. The reason why they hear so many memorized answers is in part 1, because these are quite predictable questions like tell me about your job, your studies, where you live, where you're from. A lot of students will memorize answers in the hope to impress the examiner. But it's very, very easy to spot these, and it actually lowers your score. Related to that are very long answers, and these two are related. So often students will go online, they'll go onto YouTube, they'll go onto websites that have these kind of template answers, and often those are just way, way too long. You don't have to give very long answers to a question like, do you work or do you study, or tell me about where you live. Imagine you are in a normal situation. Imagine you are meeting someone for the first time and they say, where are you from? You wouldn't talk for 20 minutes. Also, sometimes these are off topic. So again, these 3 are kind of related because the examiner will ask you quite predictable questions in part 1. But then if they think that you have memorized answers, what they'll do is they're a bit sneaky. They will throw in very unusual questions like, how often do you wear hats? Do you like hats? When was the last time you had a birthday cake? These are all questions that you're not expecting, and it's really to catch out people who are just relying on memorized answers. And that is a really big sign to the examiner that you don't know what you're doing and you've just memorized a bunch of stuff. The other thing that is quite surprising for many people is that they sound very formal. Or another way to say this would be they sound robotic. They sound like you're talking to a robot. Now, this could be because of stress, this could be because of nerves, but it also could be that you have just been taught the wrong way. Often teachers with very little experience and students who don't know the test very well think this is a big, important test. This is a very formal occasion. I should speak like this. Hello, my name is Chris. You do not need to do that. And I'm going to show you some answers from my students. And I want you to think about, do they do any of these things, or do they do other things? And then we'll talk about the main characteristics of a band 7, 8, or 9 student. To thank you for watching this video, I want to give you a free course that has helped thousands of students improve their IELTS speaking score. What it's going to do is take you through every single part of the test and give you strategies for part 1, part 2, and part 3, and also allow you to practice at home for free and get feedback. To sign up for that for free, all you have to do is just click the link in the description. Thanks very much, and let's get back to the video. Do you ever miss being in high school?
I do actually, because I started working very early. I did not get to experience the university or college. So the memories that I have, or the friends I have, is from high school. And I do think about times where we could just go back and have a reunion and like have that moment again.
Do you have any animals in your home as pets?
Yes, I have 2 dogs. They're both from the shelter, the animal shelter. They're rescues. Yeah, I've always had pets. Our family really likes keeping animals around.
So you can probably hear there that it didn't sound very memorized. It wasn't very long. They stayed on topic, and it sounded like a normal conversation. Especially Band 9 students, it doesn't seem like you're talking to an IELTS candidate. It feels like you're talking to a friend or talking to a colleague. They will also always answer the question directly. So if you ask them, do you like hats? It'll be, yes, I like hats. If you ask them, what's your favorite flavor of birthday cake? They will say vanilla or chocolate. Even though they might have never thought about that before, they will still have enough English and enough ability to answer any question. Now let's talk about seasons of the year. What's your favorite season of the year?
Well, I love any time when the sun starts to come out. So around spring or early summer, before it gets too hot. You know, I just love a little bit of vitamin D, and it makes me happier as well. So that is definitely better than the winter.
What do you do when it gets too hot in the summer?
Hide. I tend to also, go into any kind of buildings with air conditioning, and I have the fan on every night when it's really hot. So yeah, when it gets really hot in the summer, I really need a lot of like fans and, kind of just anything I can hold with me when I go out as well.
Now, none of those answers were very long, but they did develop their answers. So there's enough development. Normally what they do is they will directly answer the question, and then they might add in some explanation, an example, maybe a little story, maybe a little bit of extra detail. Again, there's no set number of sentences. You shouldn't go into the exam thinking I must use 2 sentences or 3 sentences, or I must not go over 3 or 4 sentences, because that's just too much thinking. We want to remove as much thinking as possible and just allow you to answer questions naturally. A good little tip is, if you are confused about this, imagine you're starting a new job and you're meeting your colleagues for the first time, and they say to you, where do you live? You probably wouldn't just say London, because that's a little bit rude, to be honest. It doesn't really give people a lot to go on. You might say, oh, I've just moved to London. I've actually just moved to an area called Wandsworth. It's really nice. It's close to the river. So you can see there that I didn't really think about how many sentences to use there, or whether I should use an example or whether an explanation. I just thought, how do I sound like a normal human being? Okay, so let's move on to part 2 of the speaking test. Part 2, you will get a cue card like this one, and you will have 1 minute to prepare your answer. And then you will be asked to speak for up to 2 minutes. And this is slightly different from part 1 and part 3, because this is a monologue. The examiner isn't asking you questions. The examiner isn't interacting with you. The examiner is just sitting back and listening to you. And it's a really important part for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's very unusual to speak for up to 2 minutes in a foreign language. Often this is the first time anyone has ever done this, so it can be quite daunting. And the second reason is more important, because the reason I think they put this part in here is because it gives the examiner a real chance to just focus on what you're saying. Focus on your fluency, your pronunciation, are you answering the question, your grammar, your vocabulary. So it's really important that you do well and you avoid these things that average students do. So the first one might be quite surprising. They rigidly stick to bullet points. So it's important that you understand the bullet points there are there to help you. They're not there to hinder you. So what average students normally do is they will just read bullet point number 1, then, oh, what do I say about bullet point number 2? I'll get to bullet point number 3. I don't know what to say. Let's go on to bullet point number 4. And then before they know it, they have run out of things to say and they're only 30 seconds in, which is going to lower your score. You must speak until the examiner stops you in and around the 2-minute mark. Band 7, 8, and 9 students do something very, very different, which we'll talk about in a second. We've already mentioned this. They often run out of ideas. This is because they're just sticking to bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4. Doesn't really give them enough to go on and they just stop talking. And I often hear students trying to make things way too complicated by using some kind of trick or template that they've memorized. For example, a very popular one is PPF. Past, present, future. The intention is to make things easier for you, but it can end up making things more complicated because it's a very unnatural way to answer any question. When have you ever been in a coffee shop and someone has asked you a question and you think, I'm going to talk about the past, and then I'm going to talk about the present, and then maybe compare the present with the past, and then talk about the future. You're just doing way too much thinking, and often students will get questions that they don't know what they're going to do in the future, or the past is just not applicable at all. So this can make things worse. And band 7, 8, and 9 students don't use this at all. What do they do? Let's listen to one and think about what they do differently.
The first time I met a new friend, so I'm going to go way back. It was my first day of school, kindergarten, and I met a girl named Amanpreet Kaur. We were about, I think we just turned 4 years old. We met obviously in kindergarten, first day of school. What I liked about her when I first saw her, we were sitting together where the teacher made us sit next to each other. And she had this long hair and it was like sectioned into 2 parts and it was just braided all the way down. And she had the cutest face I've ever seen. She had this little fluffy marshmallow-like face. I guess that's all it takes when you're a kid to want to be friends with somebody. And then I tried to... So there's like this little thing that kids do where they put their thumb out to show other kids that I want to be your friend. And then if you don't want to be friends with them, you do this. It's like a silly little thing. So I did this to her. I put my thumb out to say, hey, do you want to be friends? And she was like, this. And I was heartbroken. I was like, how can she not want to be my friend? And then I saw her again the next day. And the next day after that, and the day after that. And then eventually we ended up becoming best friends. She did it back to me, obviously, at some point. She was my first best friend that I ever had in life. She was from Punjab, which is a part of India. And her mom used to make the most amazing, it's called paratha. It's like this stuffed bread. It's like they put potato and spices into a flatbread. And my mom used to make something called sira, which is sweet semolina situation.
That's the end of the 2 minutes.
Okay.
So again, this was very natural. The student just was able to speak naturally, the conversation flowed, and they were able to speak quite fluently and easily for up to 2 minutes. How did they do that? Well, the first thing that they did was they just focused on the main topic. Again, if we look at the cue card, you will have the bullet points here, but at the top, this is the main topic. By just focusing on the main topic, this gives you a lot more freedom to speak fluently and naturally rather than trying to do bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, it sounds like a natural conversation because again, they're not using any tricks, any memorized structures or anything like that. It is again like talking to someone in a coffee shop saying, let's talk about this, or what do you think about this? Now you might be thinking, well, should we not use the bullet points? Well, they do use the bullet points, but they only use them when it's appropriate to help them. So they use the bullet points to help them speak naturally. So what does that mean? Well, if they see bullet point number 1 and they think, I can easily talk about that, they talk about that. But if they look at bullet point number 2 and think, I don't really know about that, I don't feel comfortable talking about that, don't talk about that. And then they can talk maybe about bullet point number 3 and bullet point number 4, but they can add other things below the bullet points, other things related to that main topic. All they're doing is just picking things that make it easy for them to speak like a human being naturally to the examiner. Now let's move on to part 3. Part 3, in my opinion, is the most challenging part because it requires the student to do a few special things that most students are not used to doing. So let's look at part 3 for these band 5, 6.5 students. So the biggest difference between part 1 and part 3 is part 1 is just, as I've said, every day getting to know you, chit chat, small talk type questions. Part 3 are more academic style questions, though it doesn't matter if you're doing academic or general training. The reason why I say they're more academic style questions is they're asking you about more abstract topics. So in part 1, they might say something like, do you use public transport? That is a question about you. It's impossible to get it wrong. But in part 3, they might say something like, should governments give citizens public transport for free? Or what are the advantages and disadvantages of using a private car versus buses, for example? These are not really about you. You can talk about you, but they're more abstract type questions that require a far more developed answer. So what band 5, 6, 6.5 students are doing is they're often giving very short answers. The examiner is not really interested in the answer to the question. This is not a knowledge test. This is not an IQ test. They are testing your ability to communicate. And part of communication is developing your answer. And we'll talk about how band 8 and 9 students do that in part 3 in a second. You'll often hear these students saying things like, I don't know anything about that topic, or that was a very, very difficult question. And they will often just not attempt an answer at all. Now, let me tell you a little secret about IELTS examiners on test day for the speaking test. If they think you're good, they will ask you more and more difficult questions because they have to separate out the band 7s from the band 8s from the band 9s. So they're going to ask you increasingly difficult questions to see if you can cope with it. If you don't answer the question, or you just do something like, I've seen students laugh because they're probably nervous, I've seen students just go, I don't know. You are basically telling the examiner, I don't deserve one of these higher bands. I am one of these lower band students. It's also very, very obvious to the examiner that you want the exam to be over. It is a very tiring day. It is a very stressful situation. The examiner is just throwing lots of difficult questions at you. You've been speaking in a foreign language for 15 minutes maybe at this stage. You just want it to be over. And what students will do is they will just give very short answers because your brain is screaming at you. Just give the examiner short answers and you can leave and this ordeal can be over. And it's also very obvious to the examiner that your range is limited. What do I mean by range? Well, the examiner will be thinking about your range of grammar and your range of vocabulary. This is an opportunity for them to ask you about lots of different topics and also asking you questions that require more complex grammar structures. Now, they're not doing this to be mean, it's just the best way to test someone's language level. So when they ask you about a more difficult topic, again, students won't be able to answer the question, or they will just refuse to answer the question. And then they'll ask you maybe a question that requires a more difficult tense or more difficult grammar structure to answer it effectively, and you're not able to do that. You're just using those basic structures. Let's have a listen to a few answers from our VIP students and think about whether they do these things or whether they do things differently. Is it easy to predict the weather in your country?
I suppose it is, yeah, because like I said earlier, some parts of India, the weather the temperature doesn't go over a certain degrees, but wherein some parts are really hot and humid throughout the year. So I think it's quite easy to predict, but when it comes to rain or monsoon season, it's a bit hard. Like a few months ago, in the north of India, it was raining heavily and the rain did not stop for, I'd say 2 weeks. So that was not predictable.
Why do you think some people fail in some careers?
I think one of the main drivers, I think, for people is money. And when you do anything solely because of money, then it will never work. And the reason people fail, I think, the biggest reason is because they have failed to align their identity with their work. Because we spend a third of our lives, in work. So a very big proportion of it, needs to feel fulfilled. And it can only be fulfilled if you understand, what you like authentically inside, and then, go into a career. But then the reality is that most people then, jump in and figure it out, explore, and then we'll work it out, in hindsight. I guess that's what life's about.
So as you can probably hear, they attempt every question. Doesn't matter if they're thrown a difficult question. As you heard there, some of the questions were extremely difficult and it was obvious that the student was not an expert on that topic. But again, it's not an IQ test, it's not a knowledge test. The best thing that you can do, even if you know nothing about that topic, is attempt some kind of an answer, because you're explaining there to the examiner, okay, I don't know about this topic, but my English is good enough. I can communicate in English, and it is an English communication test. And there was lots of development. So they answered the question, but they also explained why they thought that or why other people thought that. They might have thrown in an example or a story related to their life. And what you often hear Band 7, 8, and 9 students doing is showing the other side of the argument. They might say, well, some people think this, but other people think this, and I agree with this person or I agree with that person. So they're fully exploring that topic. They're not just saying, I think this. And they have no problem with range. Again, it is the intention of the examiner to test your language ability. The best way that they can do that is to throw these more complex topics that require a broader range of grammar, a broader range of vocabulary. And as you can hear, Band 7, 8, and 9 students just naturally answer those questions. So now you know what to expect in Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. And that was just a general overview of the difference between lower level students and higher level students. Now let's look at some very specific common mistakes. Let's get into even more detail so that you can really understand what not to do and then improve your score to a Band 7, 8, and 9. So here are some common mistakes. Okay, so what we're going to do is talk about these very, very briefly. Then I'm going to get my glamorous assistant here to ask me a question. I haven't prepared any answers or anything like that. I want it to be as natural as possible. And I will pretend to be a student who is doing one of these common mistakes. In the comments, what I want you to tell me is, which of these am I doing? My favorite website is IELTS Advantage because it helps me with my IELTS scores. Okay, so that's the first one. What do you think would be the problem with that one? To thank you for making it this far in the video, I want to give you 10% off our VIP course. The IELTS VIP course is the most successful IELTS course in the world. That is a fact because we have more Band 7, 8 and 9 success stories than any other IELTS course in the entire world. We do that by simplifying the whole IELTS process, supporting you with some of the best IELTS teachers in the world, and being with you every step of the way until you get the score that you need. All you have to do is just look down in the description, just click that, and you can sign up. If you have any questions about the VIP course, always feel free to get in touch with us. We answer 100% of the questions that we get. Hope that you become a VIP. If not, enjoy the rest of this free video. Justin asked me, what's my favorite website? And I said, my favorite website is IELTS Advantage because it helps me with my IELTS scores. Which of these things do you think is the problem? In the comments, let me know. Okay, so it's pretty obvious. It's too short. But why is that a problem? So, I mean, the grammar was fine, the vocabulary was fine, the fluency was fine, pronunciation was fine. Why is that a problem? Well, you're not really giving the examiner enough to go on if you give a really short answer to a question. And they might ask you follow-up questions like why, or can you, asking you to develop your answer a little bit more. That might put you off. It might be like, oh, am I doing something wrong? It'll cause extra stress. You want to be developing your answer a little bit more than that. Now for part one, you don't have to develop it much more than that, but just giving a one sentence answer wouldn't really be enough. You'd have to add a little bit more detail or an explanation or example or something like that just to develop it a little bit more. This is going to be more difficult than I thought. I thought this was going to be really easy, but trying to answer a question and pretend to be someone else is more difficult than I thought. All right, so give me another one. My favorite kind of weather is cold weather because I do not like to be cold. When I am cold, I feel bad and I shiver because it is very cold. I always like warm weather. Warm weather is nice. That's why I like the summertime. Okay, so in the comments, what do you think about that one? Was it a memorized answer, trying to impress the examiner, too long, too short, robotic delivery? What do you think? And do we chances robotic delivery? Yeah, so, I mean, this is not really a student's fault. It can be a couple of things. Number one, it can be because you're really stressed out. It is a very stressful exam. Obviously, you might have a lot of pressure in terms of it might cost you your job. It might lead to your family being, upset with you. You might have a visa waiting for you. It is a very high stakes test. So what happens is people just, kind of clam up and speak in a very robotic way. So that is a problem because you're not being as fluent as you could be. Also, if you are so stressed out that you are speaking in that way, then people tend to make, in my experience, more grammar and vocabulary mistakes because they're just not relaxed and speaking in a natural way. And also sometimes it can cause pronunciation issues for the same reason because a lot of people when they're speaking in that way can speak in a very quiet way, like inside their mouth is how I always describe it, rather than projecting their voice, so it might make it a little bit difficult for the examiner. So there's lots and lots of problems you can have there. The other reason is a lot of people have been taught that the IELTS speaking test is a formal academic test and you should speak in a formal academic way. It's not. It's a speaking test about how you would speak to a normal person in a normal situation. You're not going to speak in that overly formal, overly academic, robotic way because that's not how you would speak to someone. Like imagine if Justin and I were having a meeting and I said like, how was your weekend? My weekend was good. He wouldn't really talk like that. So one of the key pieces of advice is just speak to the examiner in the same way that you would speak to a friend or a colleague or a classmate or a teacher, someone who you know, when you're not speaking in a really informal or formal way. Just in a normal way would be good. Okay. So you could say that I'm a real fashionista and I wouldn't really dress down once in a blue moon because I am a real fashionaholic. and fashion is my life. I would die for fashion. So when I'm in the mood, I go to the shopping center with my buddies and we buy the place out and we spend lots of money buying new clothes. Okay, so in the comments, what would you say is the problem there? Trying to impress, yeah. So that person is trying to impress the examiner, and what they're doing is they're just thinking of as many big words and idioms and fancy vocabulary as they can. They are not answering the question. They're not thinking about answering the question. They're approaching the test as if it is a vocabulary test. You can also try and impress the examiner with fancy grammar structures and things like that, but that person was principally thinking that the test wasn't a speaking test, it was a vocabulary test, and ignoring these things. All right, so when you're doing that, when you're focusing just on vocabulary, then you're not really focusing on being coherent and answering the question. So there's a relationship between these two, and you shouldn't worry about one more than the other. For example, if you are just focusing on grammar and being 100% accurate all the time, then your fluency tends to go down. All right, because you can't think of the perfect grammar every single sentence and hope to have really, really good fluency. Same with your vocabulary. If you're just focusing on vocabulary, then your fluency and your coherence tend to be affected. So there is a relationship between these two. Remember, it's a speaking test, and these are components of speaking. It's not just a pronunciation test or just a vocabulary test or just a grammar test or just a fluency test. So we talked about robotic delivery, we've talked about trying to impress the examiner, we've talked about being too short. Memorized answers, this is when obviously you memorize an answer, and this really tricks people or trips people up, because what you'll do is you'll memorize an answer for a common question like, tell me about your hometown, or describe your home, or one of these, like, what is your job? What do you like to do in your free time? So they'll memorize that answer, and they'll give normally a very, 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 very long answer to a question. And I'm sure you've heard people do this. What that means is two things. Normally, that will affect your coherence because you're not really answering the question, because you'll ask someone, like a really good example was on Friday. I was working with a student and I asked them, is your hometown a good place to grow up? And they told me about the architecture in their hometown, the transport system in their hometown, what else did they talk about? Education system, like telling me everything about their hometown. And I said to them, you just memorized an answer about your hometown and you've given me that. So that obviously affected their coherence. What will also happen when you memorize an answer is the examiner will not think, oh my God, this person is amazing. The examiner will think, this person has memorized an answer, I'm pretty sure. Let's ask them a more difficult question, or a question on a different topic, or a follow-up question, and see how they cope with that. They'll ask you a different question, and what people who memorize answers normally do is like, I don't know how to answer that because because I haven't memorized an answer. So you're not fooling the examiner. They're trained in these things. They know what you're doing. They do it for a job. Could someone come into your job and try and trick you on something as silly as that? Hopefully not. So why do you think the examiners would fall for that? So you've just demonstrated that you can't speak English. You've demonstrated that you can memorize answers and give very, very long answers, but it's not a memorization test, all right? It's a speaking test. Let's look now at best practices. So I'm not going to give you the best practices. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Justin again to ask me some questions. I'm going to pretend that I am a student in the test, all right? And I'm going to answer them as best I can, demonstrate what I would do. And then we're going to come up as a group. In the comments, you're going to tell me some of the things that you think I did right. Remember, we're going to be basing everything on these: pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, fluency, and coherence. So, and compare them also with the bad examples that we showed you here, okay? I would have to say, hands down, my favorite food is steak.
So my wife cooks this for me every Friday. Normally I go for a workout and been lifting weights and running around, and I'm really, really hungry. So what I get is steak with chips, mushrooms and onions, and I just feel fantastic after I have that, and normally I have a little glass of red wine to go along with that as well. So in the comments, tell me some of the things that you think I did well, and so how could we create some best practices in the comments. And that wasn't by the way, that wasn't a perfect answer, or an answer that you should copy, or an answer that, that's the only way to answer that. What's your favorite food? There are a million ways that you could answer that could get you a band 9. There are a million ways you could answer it to get you a band 5. The content wasn't important. What we're trying to get are these best practices, the things that you can learn from so that you can not copy that answer, but model it and learn from it. So a lot of you are saying that the answer was too long. What a lot of people learn from teachers and from online resources is that you should use a set number of sentences. That you should say 3 sentences, or you should say a set number of words, it should be 50 words long. That is not how you should think about it. You should think about the answer as, how can I answer this question naturally? If somebody asked me this question under normal circumstances, how would I answer it? Don't be thinking of number of sentences or anything like that. So a reason, so put explanation here. Good coherence, which I think what you mean is that I actually answered the question. I got to the point and I answered it fully. So developed, specific, okay. Rather than just give one answer, I'll give a few different answers and then you can judge. It's better to have a good sample. I love to watch US crime dramas. So there's a few of those that I've really become addicted to in the past, principally The Sopranos, The Wire and Breaking Bad. So these are all very, very long series, and what I like about them is they're very episodic, so that you can just go from episode to episode to episode, and it's try and watch 1 or 2 a night, but sometimes it goes a little bit over that because they are very, very addictive. Again, from that, what would you say are the good things that you could use to model as well? Someone said the idea generation was good. I wouldn't really say idea generation for the speaking test so much, because remember, part 1 is about you. You can't get it wrong. So you're not thinking of an idea like making something up really. What you're doing is just talking honestly about what you're, that was my favorite food. Those were my favorite TV programs. And those are much, much easier to talk about than to make something up, to generate ideas. Sometimes you'll have to do that, but most of the time it's better just to speak naturally. A little pause for thinking. Yeah, so fluency does not mean speaking without pausing ever. You do need to think, all right? It is better to think for a couple of seconds and then give your answer than to immediately begin talking and then get lost and, start, So I don't think it's, mandatory for you to think at the beginning. I don't think that's a best practice. But I think the point I'm trying to make is fluency does not mean that you never pause. It's a bad fluency is when you're pausing at an unnatural rate. Examples, grammar, I'm fluent, okay. So I'll give one more example and then we can talk about what I did. I use too many apps, I use hundreds of apps. Actually, recently what I've been trying to do is to make my phone a lot healthier to make me more productive. So what I mean by that is, in the past I had a lot of social media apps such as Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and that wasted a huge amount of time. So I deleted all of those from my phone, and now I use apps that can track my number of steps that I'm taking, my sleep, general exercise, calorie intake, things like that. So that will help me improve in the future rather than just waste time with apps that don't really improve my life at all. Again, what do you think about that one? So all of them have some some common themes, all right? And that's what you want to do. You don't want to be copying the content or thinking, this is exactly what he said, or this is exactly what he did. Just think about the common themes amongst them. So definitely a lot of you talked about that they were natural. And yes, these are about me. They're questions that they're asking about me. When you are in the test, they're asking about you. So just ask them naturally or answer them naturally. And that is going to help your fluency, but I also think it helps your grammar, your pronunciation, and your vocabulary as well, because you're not thinking too much, because it's just easier to talk about yourself and to talk naturally. Also, I wasn't talking in a very robotic way. I wasn't trying to impress the examiner. I wasn't trying to insert lots of fancy words or anything like that. I was just speaking. Obviously, I'm a native English speaker, so that obviously helps. But if you need a 7 or above, you should be at a high level of English anyway. So just speaking in the same way as, imagine it's your first day of a new class and you're speaking to your classmates. How would you answer those questions? So a lot of you talked about the questions are developed. I gave some explanations, some examples. Again, going back to this, answering it naturally, I don't think it is a good idea to answer part 1 questions in a very formulaic way. What do I mean by that? So what a lot of people will do is suggest that you answer explanation and then example. Like, that is a very, very formulaic way of answering a question. Can that help you? Sure, it can help you, but do you answer questions in your native language in that way? Like, imagine you're speaking to your brother or your sister or your friend tonight and they asked you, what's your favorite TV program, or what's your favorite food? You wouldn't think, like, my favorite food is steak. Explain, you know, and then, okay, it's my favorite food because blah, 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 blah. Example, last week, you wouldn't really do that. Does that mean that you should never use explanations and examples? No, but just have them as like tools in your toolkit. Think about it when you're developing things. I need to give the examiner enough information so that they can understand what I think about this, but don't think about it in a formulaic way, like a mathematical formula. You can add a little bit more detail, add an explanation, add an example, but not in a formulaic way. Hopefully that makes sense. Coherence, so that's related to, I developed the answer and I answered the specific question. When they ask you about your favorite food, tell them about your favorite food. If they ask you about apps, talk about apps. Answer the specific question that they're asking you. And also, again, developing it will help with your coherence. I'm a native English speaker, so I don't want to say my grammar was great or my vocabulary was great because I was, born speaking English. Obviously as well with fluency, so we not want to talk too much about those. I'm not going to pat myself on the back by saying my English is great when I'm a native English speaker, of course. But what you will find there was I didn't try and focus on using really, really impressive grammar, impressive vocabulary. What I did was just answer the questions naturally, and by doing that, the grammar and the vocabulary and the fluency just flowed from that. If your grammar and your vocabulary and your fluency is good enough and you just answer the questions naturally, these will take care of themselves. But if you go into, okay, he asked me about my favorite food, what are some big adjectives I can think of, or what are some idioms I can use? Then your fluency is going to suffer because you're thinking way too much, and you're probably going to make lots of grammar and vocabulary mistakes because you'll be thinking about grammar and vocabulary that's beyond your level, that you're not able to use yet. So use the grammar and vocabulary that you are comfortable using to fluently develop your answer, and then everything kind of looks after itself. Pronunciation, we'll not talk about that because I'm a native English speaker and hopefully my pronunciation is okay.
Next, I want to share something very, very special with you. So part 2 is probably the most challenging part of the speaking test for many, many students. What I've done is I have taken lots of real part 2 questions, and I'm going to show you how I personally would plan out the entire answer and then show you how I would answer it. This is going to fill you with confidence because you'll see even I don't really make things really complicated, and you don't need a very high level complex answer. You just keep things simple, give the examiners what they're looking for, and it can really improve your confidence on test day and your score. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Before I show you each of the cue cards and reveal my Band 9 sample answer for each of them, I want to talk about how you can use this video to improve at home. So one thing you can do is you can just sit back, relax, and watch the video. That's fine if you want to do that. But if you really want to improve, what you can do is each time I show you the cue card, you could pause the video, spend 1 minute preparing your own answer, and then set 2 minutes on your phone, record yourself answering the actual question, and then listen to my answer, and you can compare. Now, if my answer is completely different from yours, that doesn't matter. What matters is you are actually practicing, you are thinking about these questions, and you are actually speaking. And listening back and thinking about your performance is really, really going to help. So if you want to do that, that is really going to help you improve your speaking. Or if you just want to sit back, that's fine as well. So let's have a look at these cue cards. Okay, so talk about a time when you received good news. So that'll be my wife's passport. It was before Easter. Give a background on why it was good news and what the news was about. So that will include that, and explain why the news was special. Will allow us to travel. No need for visas. And then if we have time, we can go into the holiday. So I received amazing news just before Easter this year. My wife got her new passport. Now, for most people, that wouldn't be great news, but for my wife, because she's not from the UK, that was her first passport. So it was an amazing thing to happen. Just to give you some background on why it was so important and so special, if you're not from the UK and you get married to a citizen from the UK, it takes between 5 and 6 years before you can get an actual passport. You can live in the UK, but you're not allowed to get a passport. You have to apply multiple times, send them mountains of information, and spend thousands of pounds trying to get that done. And what that does is it creates a huge problem, because if you have what's called a spouse visa for the UK and you don't have one of the premium passports that allows you to travel around the world, it means you're kind of stuck in the UK. So for about 5 or 6 years, we were living in the UK, but my family could only travel to my wife's home country. She couldn't travel to Europe, she couldn't travel to America without going through a very stressful process of applying for visas there. So getting this passport was amazing news, because it means that we can go on holiday, we can travel anywhere pretty much in the world visa free, and it just opens up, literally opens up the whole world to my family. And to celebrate, I booked a holiday to Portugal. It was the first time my wife had ever been to Portugal, and we were able to just breeze through immigration with her British passport. Okay, so I'm gonna go snorkeling, tell a story about Barbados. So the first time, and then the second time to, it was too wavy? No, not too wavy. It's too rough. Maybe try scuba. What activity it was, where you did it, when you did it, explain whether you liked it or not. Okay. Maybe say why you like it. Okay. So an activity that I took part in outdoors recently, well, a few months ago actually, was snorkeling. So I've never been snorkeling before, and in August 2020, we went on holiday in Barbados, and we had a house right on the beach, and I went swimming every day because the water was right there. And our next door neighbor, it was an American guy, every day he would go in snorkeling, and I didn't really think that snorkeling was available. And then on our last day of the holiday, he said, "Do you want to try my snorkel?" So I put the snorkel on, and I was kind of really surprised and kind of disappointed because there was this amazing coral reef right under the sea, a stone's throw away from my house. So, for 2 weeks I was swimming and could have been watching this amazing scene underneath the water. So we rebooked our holiday to Barbados. We went back again December last year, and I brought my snorkel with me. I went to the sports shop and purchased the best snorkel I could buy and brought it in my suitcase with me. And when we got there, we discovered that the sea was too rough, so I couldn't snorkel, and the sea was rough and choppy the whole time we were there. So not only could I not snorkel, I couldn't even swim. So I missed that opportunity again. In the future, I hope to snorkel maybe somewhere else that has more reliable snorkeling. But I'd also like to try scuba diving because I think weather doesn't really matter so much because you're underneath the water, and it's a far more immersive experience, but it does require a lot of training. So maybe I need to do my PADI license. So that was wait on a flight because the flight was cancelled. We had to decide. So what we did right away, decide Portugal or Spain, or stay. Decided to stay. It was great because it was quiet. Felt very calm, but disappointed because no compensation. Okay. I hope that you're enjoying this video, but YouTube can be a little bit confusing and overwhelming. So what we've done is we've created a free IELTS course called IELTS Fundamentals. What IELTS Fundamentals does is it just boils everything down into the most important fundamental things that you need to learn. It's designed to help you remove all of the stress and just get the score that you need in the quickest possible time by just giving you the information that you need. And it covers everything. It's 100% free, and it has helped thousands of students get a band 7, 8, or 9. If you want to sign up for IELTS Fundamentals for free, click the link in the description. Thanks very much, and let's get back to the video. So recently I had to wait nearly 1 week for a flight. So we were flying back from the south of Portugal, or the Algarve, from an airport called Faro. I'm probably mispronouncing that. Apologies to any Portuguese in the audience. But what happened was our flight was at 8 p.m. from Portugal back to Belfast. And at 10 to 8, so 10 minutes before the flight was about to take off, I got a text message saying that the flight was cancelled with no explanation at all. I think it was the French traffic controllers, so thanks very much for that. And what happened in the immediate aftermath was we just said, okay, no problem. We went to a hotel, and it was actually a bonus because we went to a little town in Portugal that we would never normally go to. And it was amazing because we got to see the real Portugal. They had a fish market and a vegetable market there, right beside the water. So it was nice just to go and shop with the locals and have coffee with the locals. So it was actually a blessing in disguise. Later that day, we needed to decide either we had to get a taxi to Spain, because there was no flights available that day from Portugal to Belfast, or to take a 4-hour taxi ride to Lisbon, the capital, or just wait for the next available flight, which was 5 days away. So we decided to do that because when we added up all the costs, it was actually cheaper just to stay an extra 5 days. And that was an amazing experience because we went back to the same resort that we stayed in. And because Easter had passed, it was basically just us in the resort. So we got, not just 5-star service, 6-star service. And it was really quiet and beautiful. And having our flight cancelled was an amazing experience. Okay, there's no one that I can think of that I really want to work with. So I'm just going to pick someone famous because that's going to be easy to talk about. So Elon Musk, how you know them, Tesla, Twitter, etc. What they do, so that's kind of the same thing. The thing I would like, so it's first principles, thinking, and then he makes money by solving problems. And you could learn a lot from him. Then what else could we talk about? Probably the negatives. He's controversial. Don't know why, but he is. I suppose if I had to choose one person to work with, it would be Elon Musk. Elon Musk is one of the most successful business people in the history of the world. He's one of the richest people in the world. So it's obvious why you would want to work with him, because you could learn a huge amount from him. He's famous because not only has he started one successful company, I think he has started more than 10 successful companies. He's famous for Tesla, which was the first company to successfully start an electric car company. SpaceX, he also bought Twitter, but he also set up PayPal. So he not only has been successful, he has been successful in many different domains. And the thing that I would really like to learn from him is how he makes money and makes a profit by trying to solve problems for the planet and for people. Because Tesla makes a lot of money, but it is also saving the environment. SpaceX makes a lot of money, but it could also save humanity. If there was a natural disaster and we all had to get off the planet, then it's probably the only way we can go is to move to the moon or move to Mars. So his rationale, his modus operandi seems to be find a huge problem, solve that problem, and get paid for it. And I would really, really like to do that. I try and do that in my own business. So the IELTS test is a huge problem for thousands of people all around the world. We try and make it simple and easier for them to get the scores that they need. But I think there's probably bigger problems that I could tackle now that I've solved that IELTS problem. This is actually quite a difficult one because I don't come from a rich family. So I suppose I'll just say that. The only time I can ever remember getting money from my family is communion money. Explain what that is. That's why I received it. It was stolen from me. But it makes me very grateful because of why it was stolen in inverted commas. I don't come from a very wealthy family, so I've never been given a huge amount of money in my life.
The only time I can remember being given a significant amount of money was for my first Holy Communion. So I'm Irish, I'm from a Catholic background, and if you grew up Catholic, when you're around 7, 8 years old, you do your first Holy Communion, and it's like a big milestone in a child's life. And normally family members will give you some money. So I think at the time I was given like between 40 and 50 pounds. So in the late 80s, early 90s, can't remember exactly when that was, early 90s, that was a significant amount of money. But I actually reminded my mother the other day that she took that money from me. I said she stole it from me. And her response was, well, we didn't have any money, so I stole it from you to buy you food and to buy you clothes. So I did feel quite aggrieved at the time because a lot of my richer friends were going and buying toys and things like that. And it was the first time I'd ever had a significant amount of money, and then it was taken from me right away. But looking back now, it fills me with gratitude. I'm very grateful that it happened because it shows how much my mother struggled and how hard she worked for me in order to set me up in life. And recently my little boy did his first Holy Communion, and he got a lot more than I got, and he wasted it on buying things in a computer game. And it was a good opportunity for us to teach him about money and teach him about not wasting money. Now he wants to buy more things in the computer game, but I told him that he has to work for it and he has to do some jobs around the house if he wants that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about copyright because that's a law that affects me directly every day. So I'm going to explain what copyright is. Basically protects IP. I follow it by being original. Protects from people I hate. Let's call a spade, and explain what should happen if you break that law. So a law that I like is copyright. Copyright protects content creators, people who create things. It protects their intellectual property from being copied without authorization. The reason why I like this law is because my job, principally, 80% of my time is spent making original content. So that could be a blog post, that could be a YouTube video, it could be an image, something like that. And how this law protects me is on a daily basis, definitely a weekly basis, somebody takes my original work and just copies it completely. And what we can do is we can then tell the platforms, or sometimes like YouTube tells us, hey, somebody has copied your work. And what that allows us to do is basically get that taken down, and then YouTube can either ban them from the platform, or what they do is they have a 3 strikes policy, I think, where if they do it 3 times, they're completely banned from the platform. I do like this law, but I think that it isn't enforced enough and it isn't respected enough by other people. Recently we had, or not recently, throughout our whole career, we've had a lot of people not only copying our content, the words and the images and the video, but copying things now like our titles and our thumbnail images, which are all original, and they take a lot of creativity and brain power and time and work. And I absolutely hate the fact that somebody lazy and stupid, to be honest, can just come along and take that and steal it. And when we report people stealing our titles, people stealing our thumbnails, YouTube are less likely to take that down because they don't consider that a copyright violation, when, if you follow the letter of the law, it actually is. Okay, so Portuguese.
fish stew. Perfect, because in a pot. Restaurant allowed us to take turns. Explain how you felt. Great, because it allowed us to have a good time with our children. An unusual meal I had recently was at a Portuguese restaurant, and for the first time my wife and I and my two little boys had Portuguese fish stew. I'll not try and pronounce the Portuguese version of it, but basically it comes in a big cast iron pot, and it has rice and prawns and other fish and clams and other shellfish in it. The reason why it was such an unusual experience was it was a restaurant that was completely outside, and it was set in a big garden on the ocean, on the Atlantic Ocean, and there were cliffs kind of going down to the ocean. And it was very special because if you have two young boys, they don't want to sit in a fancy restaurant. And this allowed our boys to kind of run around the gardens and go and have a look over the cliffs and all. Don't worry, it was safe. And it allowed myself and my wife to take turns playing with the boys or eating our meal. And because the stew was in a big cast iron pot, as I said, it didn't get cold. So I would eat some while my wife was looking after my boys, and then my wife would come back and she would eat some, and then I would go and play with my boys. And they didn't really eat it because they think that, you know, prawns and things like that are gross. But we really, really enjoyed it. I would definitely go back to that restaurant again, and I would definitely order that meal. One thing we did miss out on was as we were leaving, we discovered they had a fresh fish counter where the daily catch was brought in, and you could actually go and choose your fish. My wife loves seafood, and next time we'll get the fish stew, but we'll also pick a few other things. So there'll be hiking. I'll explain 3 places or 4 places. I normally do it alone because I like to listen to podcasts or to think. And then I'll talk about the physical side of it, and then talk more about the mental benefits. And then if I run out of time or run out of things to say, I'll talk about the weather, which is kind of a downside of it. Yeah, that should be enough. As you can probably tell from looking at me, I'm not the healthiest person in the world, but one thing I do enjoy, which is quite healthy, is hiking. I live in Northern Ireland, and I live in a part of Northern Ireland which is world renowned for its natural beauty. So right on our doorstep, we have beaches, we have 2 beautiful forest parks, we have a beautiful lake, and we've got a medieval castle that you can walk around. So that means that there's a huge variety of places, and even within each of those places, like within the forest parks, there are different trails you can go down. So you're always discovering new places, and you never get bored. I like to do this on my own because I don't only do it for the physical health benefits, I do it for the mental health benefits. So I have quite a busy, stressful job, and being able to just get out in nature, we say it allows you to get your head showered here in Northern Ireland, which means, you know, just get out and bathe in nature. Not literally bathe, but just surround yourself with nature. And it not only helps you with your cardiovascular health,
it can help with stress and de-stressing as well. The only problem with hiking here in Northern Ireland is our weather is notoriously bad. So during the winter it can snow, but most of the time it is actually just raining, and walking in the rain is not, and especially when it's cold and when it's windy, is not a great experience. But in the summertime, we often get spells of weather, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, where it is nice and dry, and that is an amazing time. I generally work a lot less during those times and try and get out every day onto one of the hiking trails. Istanbul, Champions League. Who you'll go with, because my son supports Man City. Why you want to go there? To see Man City. Explain why you want to go for a short period. Champions League. So there's not much there. So I'll talk about why it's not suitable for kids. And I'll talk about other parts of Turkey. So it's a lot of walking, historical stuff, cultural stuff. Yeah. So a place I'd love to go for a short period of time is Istanbul in Turkey. There's a very specific reason for that. Is in a couple of weeks, I think it's 2 or 3 weeks, they have the Champions League final there. My little boy, Tom, who is 8 years old, is obsessed with Man City. So we watch all the Man City games here in the house, and he especially loves the Champions League. So if they make it to the final, I would love to take him to the Champions League final. I don't know if we'll be able to go, however, because tickets are quite hard to come by. But if we get the opportunity, I'd love to go. I wouldn't take him there for more than a couple of days. I know that Istanbul is an amazing place to visit, but I don't think it's suitable for children, or not for my kid anyway. The things that I would like to do in Istanbul, such as experience the wonderful food and the historical sites and the religious sites and the cultural things to do there, an 8-year-old is just not really interested in those things. So we would probably just fly in, stay the night before, go to the match, and then come back. And I think the matches are held quite late there because of the temperature, so we probably would fly back the next day. I would like to take him back to Turkey, but probably not to Istanbul, for the reasons I just said. He doesn't really like big cities, but he does like seaside resorts, and there are places like Antalya in the south of Turkey, and I'd like to take him there for a lot longer, a week or two, so he could experience Turkey and all the wonderful things there that they have for kids. Okay, so there's an old man in the sea. I met him in the sea while I was swimming. How you met them? I met them in the sea, what they do. So he's lived there for more than 80 years. In the sea nearly every day. Told me about the history of the village. And he was just so calm and serene. He's a product of his environment. And he'd also worked in tourism. So a fascinating man that I met recently, back in December, so a few months back. I was swimming in the Caribbean Sea on the west coast of Barbados, and there was an old man who was just lying back, relaxing in the sea, and he started talking to me, and I discovered that he lived in a house right on the beach in the village where I was staying. He was more than 80 years old, and I discovered that he had
been in the sea nearly every day of his life. And for me, that location is one of the most beautiful places in the entire universe. And it was quite astounding to meet someone who was doing the thing that I wish that I could do, and he'd done that for his entire life. And what struck me about this man was he was so calm, so serene, and when I thought about it, he was kind of a product of his environment. So I often wondered after meeting him, if he grew up in a let's say a poverty-stricken part of the world, in a very rough inner city neighborhood, would he be that person? So it's kind of thinking about that nature versus nurture debate. And it was also fascinating to talk to him about the village in Barbados that he grew up in, because I think his grandmother, he said, owned most of the land around that village, and she was such a lovely woman, and she just gave plots of land to everybody who needed it. So the village kind of grew up around her, and he knew everybody in the village, and they were all very tight because she had just gifted that land to everybody. So fascinating guy. So by now you're probably thinking, just give me some quick tips and tricks. Your test might be coming up very, very soon, and we're going to do that, but in a very special way. We're going to teach you all the tips and tricks you need by telling you the story of one of our most successful students, Priyanka. Priyanka failed the speaking test 4 times in a row, and we helped her improve from a band 6 to a band 8 in just 2 weeks by sharing the 4 most important tips that you need to understand in order to improve. So let's hear Priyanka's story. Priyanka failed her speaking test 4 times in a row, and she was about to give up on her dream of moving to Canada forever. But after I gave her these 4 simple tips, she jumped from a band 6 to a band 8 in just 2 weeks. So the other day I got this email. Chris, my test is in 2 weeks and I'm going to fail again. I failed my speaking 4 times in a row and I don't know why. Help! So I replied, let's do a one-on-one speaking test. And she was right. She failed again. In fact, she got a band 6 in fluency, pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. But I could tell that if she changed just 4 simple things, she was going to get a band 8 on her next test. And when I told her this, she said, do you know my test is in 2 weeks? Yes. Do you know that if I fail this time, I'll never be able to move to Canada? Yes. Don't worry. Every band 9 student that I've worked with used these 4 simple tips. The first thing we needed to work on was her poor fluency. There were more ums and ahs in every answer than an Elon Musk interview. And Priyanka had the exact same problem Elon does when he speaks publicly. You see, when anybody speaks, they make these audible pauses, these ums and ahs. This is totally normal, and we all do this when we're thinking of what to say next. Elon is thinking of very complex things like how to launch a rocket to Mars, so he has more pauses, ums and ahs, because he's thinking a lot about what to say next. And this is exactly the same reason why Priyanka's fluency was so bad. You see, your brain is just like a computer. If you're like me, you'll have hundreds of tabs open in your browser. And what happens when you have hundreds of tabs open? Your computer slows down. So you might have the latest MacBook Pro, but if you push it too hard, it slows down. Her fluency wasn't bad, she was just trying too hard. You see, she was taught by other teachers that to get a high score on the IELTS speaking test, you need to have impressive ideas. So I asked Priyanka, what happens when you're speaking in the test and you try and think of complex ideas? And she said, I freeze and my mind goes completely blank. So why try and think of complex ideas? The truth is that nowhere in the official IELTS marking criteria does it mention complexity of ideas. In fact, ideas are not marked at all. But just telling students this information doesn't really change their behavior and their performance on test day. So I decided to show Priyanka exactly what to do. So I asked her a simple IELTS speaking question, and her answer was a complete mess. The usual ums and ahs and long pauses. So I asked her the same question again, and I asked her just to change one simple thing. And this changed everything. She answered the question with band 9 fluency. And Priyanka was completely amazed. You mean simple ideas increase my score? Yes. If you're trying to use complex ideas in the speaking test, you're making your life 10 times more difficult for no gain at all. It's like trying to eat a bowl of soup with a Swiss Army knife instead of just using a simple spoon. But just because we fixed her fluency issues doesn't mean she's going to get a high score for grammar. So let's look at that next. So we did the same thing again. I asked her a simple speaking question. How has your hometown changed since you were a child? And her first answer was long, it was complex, it had multiple different tenses and multiple different grammar structures in there. Do you think an answer like this would get a high score? Well, her answer might be complex. It might have a very wide range of grammar, but it contained multiple grammar errors. So what I did was I asked her the exact same question and I gave her some advice and told her to change just one thing. And here is her answer. My hometown has changed dramatically since I was a child. It used to be a small village, but it has grown into a bustling city with new opportunities. Despite the fast pace, the sense of community has remained strong. Now, this example only has 2 of the most basic tenses in the English language. It is much simpler, but it contained 0 errors. And to get a band 7 or above on your IELTS speaking test, 50% or more of your sentences must have 0 errors. To put it simply, the more sentences you produce with no grammatical errors, the higher your score. So which answer do you think would get a higher score? The one that has a very wide range of grammar, but lots of mistakes? Or the simpler one with 0 mistakes? But like many of you, Priyanka was still very worried and she asked me, what about range of grammar? Aren't I being judged on both range and accuracy? Well, in the test, you know the way the examiner asks you a range of different questions. Well, they're doing that to test the range of your grammar. Just by answering each question naturally and appropriately, you'll naturally use a range of different grammar structures and tenses. All you have to do is just answer the question. So in less than 5 minutes, we had fixed 50% of Priyanka's problems, but she's still worried about her vocabulary and her pronunciation. She'd been told by all of her old teachers that she needed to use complex vocabulary and that her accent was a problem and this was going to lower her pronunciation score. So I said, listen, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is you've just fixed your grammar and your fluency issues in less than 5 minutes and you're probably going to get a very high score. The bad news is you're going to have to completely change everything about your vocabulary. And her reaction was very predictable. Like nearly every student I tell this to, they say, but my old teacher told me that I need to make all of my vocabulary complex. And this is 100% true. Most teachers, especially on YouTube, teach you that complex words equal a higher score. But we teach students something completely different. Think of vocabulary as tools in a toolkit. Each tool helps you do a job. Each word you know helps you discuss different topics. This tool helps you talk about your hometown, and this tool helps you talk about where you'd like to live in the future. Band 8 and 9 students have enough words, enough tools, so that they can handle any question or any topic. You see, using fancy vocabulary is like buying a very expensive fancy tool when all you need is a hammer to hit in a nail. The truth is that the vast majority of students that we work with have enough vocabulary already to get the score that they need. But because they've been taught to use very high-level complex words, they make lots of mistakes and this actually lowers their score. It's like a band 7 is a weight that they can easily lift already. But instead of just lifting that weight, they try and lift a weight way heavier that they're not capable of lifting, and they end up dropping it on their head. So did Priyanka just answer some questions and use simple vocabulary and live happily ever after and get the score that she needed? No. Like many students, she got very angry with me for criticizing her old teachers. She told me that this was going to lead to failure, and she ended the call. So a few days go past and I don't hear anything from Priyanka. Finally, I check my email. She's booked another one-on-one speaking test with me. But at this point, her test is in 24 hours the next day. She's not just worried, she's completely freaking out. So I asked her a simple question. You've failed 4 times before. Do you think doing the same thing that you did those 4 times is going to lead to success? You see, all these speaking tips and tricks that you'll find online are just ways of you trying to trick the examiner into thinking that you're good enough and that you deserve a higher score than you're really capable of. We have a saying here in Ireland, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. The truth is that you are good enough to get the score that you need. You just have to use the English level and the words and the grammar and the vocabulary that you already have and show the examiner your real, genuine English level. So finally, Priyanka said, let's do a practice test, let's do it your way. Her ideas were simple but relevant, her grammar was appropriate and accurate, and her vocabulary was wide-ranging enough that she could talk about any topic I asked her about, and she was able to speak accurately and fluently. But this just left her pronunciation. If she couldn't fix her pronunciation issues, it doesn't matter how good the rest of it was. She would still fail to get the score that she needed. And Priyanka's big pronunciation problem was that she spoke too quickly. If you speak too quickly, it is really difficult for the examiner to understand every word that you're saying. And if the examiner doesn't understand every word, they give you a low score. But in that final one-on-one session, her pronunciation popped up from a band 6 to a band 8 without me giving her any advice at all. She changed one thing without me telling her what to do. You see, once she answered each question naturally and used the grammar and vocabulary she already knew how to use, she relaxed. This meant that she made fewer mistakes, was less nervous, and relaxed even more. The more relaxed she was, the better her pronunciation. By fixing everything and being able to speak to the examiner in the same way that she would speak to a friend or a colleague, she slowed everything down. I could understand 100% of what she was saying, and she instantly improved her pronunciation. And a result, on test day, she got an amazing band 8. She moved to Canada, she found a better job, she earned more money, and lived happily ever after. And she never had to think of the silly IELTS test ever again. In this video, I'll reveal the most common sentence patterns used by Band 7, 8 and 9 students. We've used AI to analyze thousands of Band 7, 8 and 9 performances so that you can learn from them and improve your score. We'll also be playing a little game throughout the video, and if you get enough points, you'll win a very special prize at the end. So let's start off with question 1. Which of these sentence patterns is the most common for Band 7, 8 and 9 students in part 1 of the speaking test? I'm a, my role entails, in my professional capacity, and I am responsible for. Final answer? The correct answer is A, I'm a. So when asked, do you work or study, which is the most common question that you'll get in part 1 of the speaking test, the most common response from Band 7, 8 and 9 students is simply, I'm a teacher, worker, whatever you do. But isn't that a little bit too simple for a Band 7, 8 and 9 student? Well, let's continue and we'll explain later in the video. Question 2. Which of these sentence patterns is the most common for Band 7, 8 and 9 students in part 1 of the test? I originate from, I hail from, I'm from, I am a product of. Final answer? And the correct answer is, I'm from. So like question 1, all of the wrong answers are technically correct. The English is absolutely fine. But in general, students that try and use those more advanced options tend to get a lower score. I know that doesn't make any sense right now. Continue to watch the video and we'll explain how that makes sense and how to improve your score.
Question 3. Which of these sentence patterns is the most common for band 7, 8 and 9 students in part 1? I prefer, I like, I normally, I live in. Final answer? And the correct answer is I like. But these are actually all very, very common sentence patterns in part 1 of the speaking test. We use I like and I prefer to discuss things that we like doing. We use I normally to talk about daily routines. And we use I live in to talk about the accommodation that we live in, or maybe talk about where we're from. Again, you're probably extremely surprised that these high-level students use such simple language. It must get more complicated when they start talking in part 2 of the test. Let's move on to part 2 of the test to find out. Which of these sentence patterns is most used by band 7, 8 and 9 students in part 2 of the IELTS speaking test? We went to, we were going, they had gone, we had been going. So this is a tricky one. Would you like to phone a friend? We use things called narrative tenses to tell stories about past experiences. And looking at these 4 options, these are all narrative tenses. One is past simple, one is past continuous, one is past perfect, and one is past perfect continuous. Any of these could be used to tell a story about the past, but the most common tense among these is past simple. So I'm going to go for we went to. Final answer? Correct. So now that we know that it's very common to use narrative tenses in part 2, let's look at how to use them in question number 5. Which of these sentences is incorrect? I went to London for 3 years. I was watching TV when the phone rang. He realized he left his passport at home. I'd been walking for hours before we found a restaurant. Final answer? And the correct answer is I went to London for 3 years. This is very, very important because it shows a crucial point about part 2 of the speaking test. It is not about which sentences you use or the range of different tenses that you use. It is about choosing a sentence that is appropriate and accurate. So in part 2, you'll be given a range of different bullet points. And the last bullet point, the most common one, the most popular one, will look like this and explain how you felt about that thing. So let's move on to question 6, all about how you feel. Which of these sentence patterns would get the highest score? I felt sad. I was over moon. I have a feeling of overwhelming joy. Words cannot describe the depths of my feelings. So that's a tricky one. Do you want to ask the audience? Audience, please pick the correct answer. And if you want to play along at home, in the comments, write A, B, C, or D. So let's look at the results. 49% think that it's D, 19% C, 17% A, and 15% think it's B. So 49% of you are wrong. It's wrong for 2 reasons. One, you didn't actually answer the question. That's not actually saying how you feel about anything. And examiners are trained to spot memorized answers. This sounds like a memorized answer, so you would actually get a lower score rather than a higher score. 19% of you are wrong because this is simply the wrong verb tense. Remember, it's not just whether the sentence is appropriate, but it also has to be accurate. 15% of you are wrong because this is simply inaccurate. It is wrong to say, I was over a moon. It is, I was over the moon. If you say to the examiner, I was over a moon, again, you are lowering your score. You're not increasing your score because you used some magic idiom. And well done to the 17% of you playing at home who got it correct. It answers the question and it is grammatically accurate. It is better
than all of the others, therefore. So let's move on to the final round where we're going to look at part 3 of the speaking test. Part 3 is the most challenging, it is the most difficult, it has the most difficult questions and requires the most complex answers of the whole test. So question 7, what was the most common sentence pattern for band 7, 8 and 9 students in part 3 of the speaking test? I totally agree, not necessarily, it's possible that, in my opinion. So all of these are very, very common, but let's look at what they do. So I totally agree, we use that functional language to do the job of agreeing with someone. Not necessarily, again, the function of that sentence pattern is to disagree with someone. It's possible that, the function of that is slightly different. It's possible that is to consider someone else's opinion. And in my opinion, you are expressing your opinion. And band 7, 8 and 9 students use this type of language, this functional language all the time because it helps them do things. They're not thinking about the most advanced pattern to use or the most high-level structure to use. They're thinking, what do I want to say? And what sentence pattern helps me do that? In other words, they're just solely focused on clearly answering the question. And the most common one is, in my opinion, because you will be giving your opinion a lot. But you're not done there. You can't just give lots and lots of opinions and get a high score. You must back it up with explaining your point of view. Question 8. Which of these is the most common way band 7, 8 and 9 students explain things? Like, in other words, that is to say that, because. Now, all of these are actually fine to use. All of them are correct. All of them can be used to explain why you believe something is true or why you have that opinion. But the most common way is because. Too simple? Well, no, because is the most common way native English speakers use. That's the most common sentence pattern that they use to explain things. Would a native English speaker get a low score because they use everyday normal English like because? So will you get a band 9? We're down to the final question, question 9. So you've stated your opinion, you've explained that opinion, but you need to go even further. And there are a few options open for you to help you expand your part 3 answers even more. Question 9. Which of these sentence patterns is the most common way for band 7, 8 and 9 students to expand their answer even further in part 3? On other hand, for example, to sum up, in nutshell, you're probably going to need a 50-50 for that one. Do you want to take a 50-50? Computer, please take away 2 wrong answers. So they've got rid of to sum up. Why is to sum up wrong? Well, again, think back to what we talked about, functional language. To sum up is to summarize something. It is actually quite rare for high-level students to summarize what they're saying in part 3. So to sum up isn't technically wrong, it is just quite rare for a student to do that. In nutshell, again, we would use that to summarize something. We don't normally summarize things, as we just said, but in nutshell is wrong because it is inaccurate. It is not in nutshell, it's in a nutshell. So that leaves us with 1 wrong answer and 1 correct answer. Will you get them all right? On other hand, is good. Showing the other side of the argument is one of the best ways that you can expand your answer even further in part 3. So you talk about one side of the argument and then you talk about the other side of the argument, if you can think of it. So it's good, but it's not right, because it's not on other hand, it is on the other hand. Again, this is why a lot of students mess up, because they go and memorize a bunch of sentence patterns before the test, and that's why you clicked on the video, isn't it? And they use them incorrectly. So the correct answer is, for example, which is just a nice, simple way of giving an example. So if you use the sentences, the sentence patterns in this video, are you guaranteed to get a band 9?
Absolutely not. The reason why you clicked on this video is because you want to memorize things. Many of you have been brought up in education systems where you have been taught that memorization is a skill. Unfortunately, IELTS is not a memorization test. It is an English communication test. Memorization is the opposite of clear communication. The key for the speaking test is to understand what type of questions might come up and then have appropriate and accurate, simple, correct ways of dealing with all the most common questions. That is why Band 7, 8 and 9 students use simple language.
Most people think that the secret to IELTS speaking success is learning how to do a few things really well. But after helping thousands of students get a Band 9 in IELTS speaking, I can tell you the opposite is actually true. The real secret is Band 9 students avoid traps set for them by IELTS speaking examiners. And if you fall for them, you will fail.
This video will show you what those traps are, how to spot them, and how to avoid them so that you can massively increase your score. And at the end of the video, I'm going to reveal the biggest IELTS speaking secret that's contained in one of my favorite movies. Understanding this secret has done more to help my students get a Band 9 than anything else. And you can learn it instantly.
The first trick they play is really sneaky, and it's the same trick my dad used to play when he worked here as a chef.
Young chefs would come into his kitchen and ask him for a job. Sure, my dad would say. Come back tomorrow, cook me something. If I like it, you can have a job. And just before they left, he'd say, is there anything you do not like to cook? And when they arrived the next day for the cooking demonstration, he'd ask them to cook the thing they hated. So what has my sneaky father got to do with IELTS speaking? If you look online for topics that will definitely come up on test day, you'll find these 3 topics. But if you look at the official Cambridge questions, you'll find very unusual topics that you weren't expecting. You see, when IELTS examiners ask about your home or your work or your hometown, they often get answers like this. I am over the moon that you asked me about my hometown. It is only once in a blue moon that I get to talk about a topic that is so close to my heart. There are a plethora of reasons why one would enjoy my hometown. Let's talk first about the 18th century architecture. But if the examiner was to ask them about a topic they weren't expecting, such as wigs, the examiner might hear an answer like this. I don't know anything about wigs. I've never worn a wig in my entire life. And things are going to get much worse for this student because the examiners are trained to spot memorized answers. And what they will do if they think that you are giving memorized answers, for example, about your hometown, they will ask you more and more difficult questions on unusual topics. And here's the scary part. The examiner has your memorized answer and your answer to the questions you weren't expecting. They will not base their score on this answer. They will base their score on this answer alone. Because as my father used to say, a chef is only as good as their worst dish, not their best dish. Your memorized answers are not your real level. Your real speaking level is dealing with questions you were not expecting. So if you do get an unusual question on test day, answer it like this. No, I've never worn a wig. I think that people who wear wigs sound and look ridiculous. I think they really just do it for attention or to be funny, which isn't funny at all, to be honest. Now, if you thought the examiners were sneaky in part 1, you're really going to hate them after I reveal their sneaky trap in part 3 of the test. Now, before I tell you what it is, let me tell you why they do it. Because once you understand the why, you'll be able to spot it immediately and deal with it much more easily. So when I was a kid in primary school, I really struggled academically. I couldn't even write my own name properly. I couldn't understand most of the lessons and I wasn't allowed to sit with the other kids. But despite all this, I was able to eventually graduate from one of the best law schools in the world. You see, when I did a test, I got all the easy questions wrong, but the few really difficult questions at the end of the test that no other students could get correct, I would always get those correct. And this is exactly what the examiners are trained to do in part 3 of the speaking test. If they believe that you are at one of the lower bands, let's say a band 4 or a band 5, they will ask you quite easy questions like these ones. But if they think that you deserve one of the higher bands, a band 7, 8, or even 9, they will ask you more and more difficult questions. Notice how in the book here, the questions get more and more difficult. But the key here is how you react to these more difficult questions. These questions will come at the very end of the speaking test when you are stressed, you are tired, and you just want the test to end. And when the examiner asks these questions, often students will give answers like, yes, I don't know. The thing you have to remember with these questions is the examiner is testing you. They are testing, are you capable of answering these band 7, 8, and 9 questions? Because they have to separate out the band 7s from the band 8s from the band 9s. One of the ways they're trained to do that is ask these really, really difficult questions and then see how you react to them. So what if you know nothing about the topic, or you just find that question really, really challenging? Are you going to automatically get a low score? No, let me show you how to cope with those questions. So if I was doing the test and I got this question and I know nothing about this topic, I am a complete idiot when it comes to this topic, I could say something like this. To be honest, I don't know anything about this topic. I'm not from India and I don't know much about cooking. But if I had to give an answer, it's very difficult to predict the future. But what I would say is maybe AI will change how the restaurants take orders and how they deliver the food to their customers. But that's just a complete guess. Now, is that the best answer in the world? No, but it is much better than, and by attempting an answer and telling the examiner what I think about that topic, even though I know nothing about it, I have indicated to the examiner that I am good enough to deal with those questions, and they might then steer the conversation to a topic that I'm more comfortable with, and then I can really show them how good I am. Now, the last trap is the sneakiest of them all, and it's got to do with how they test your vocabulary. There are thousands of words in the English language, and the examiners only have between 10 and 15 minutes to test your ability to use English vocabulary. So they came up with a genius way of testing it in around 10 minutes. See, some words we use to talk about this topic, some words this topic, and some words this topic. But if we try to use these words to talk about this topic, it doesn't work. These are called topic-specific words, and we can use them to talk about different topics. Knowing this information is crucial for two reasons. First, the examiners are trained to ask you a range of different topics on test day, so that you can't just memorize a list of band 9 words and put them into every answer and cheat the test in that way. Secondly, the examiners are more impressed with a simple, topic-specific word than a more complex word that doesn't really help you answer the question. This is why so many students fail the test when they were expecting to get a really high score, because they memorized lists of band 9 words. And this is why so many of our VIP students get a band 7, 8, and 9, not by memorizing lists of high-level band 9 words, but using the simple topic-specific words they already know.
It's actually impossible. Whoa. It's actually possible to avoid 100% of the traps that might come up in the speaking test. Not just the speaking test, but all areas of the IELTS test.
Every part of the IELTS test, reading, listening, writing, has traps contained within it. But there is one way that you can spot all of them and avoid all of them and massively increase your score. In the movie Catch Me If You Can, Leonardo DiCaprio plays a criminal that is being chased by FBI man Tom Hanks. Leo's character plays a criminal who pretends to be an airline pilot and a doctor and a lawyer. He also steals money by making fake checks and stealing credit cards. The crucial scene in this movie comes when Tom Hanks asks Leo, how did he fake passing the bar exam. The bar exam is an exam all lawyers have to take before they can become a lawyer. It is one of the most difficult tests in the entire world. And Tom Hanks can't figure out how a criminal, how a con man would be able to fake passing this test. And here's how he did it.
I didn't cheat. I studied for 2 weeks and I passed.
You see, he didn't need to fake becoming a doctor or a lawyer or an airline pilot. He didn't need to steal money to become rich. He was already talented and smart and intelligent enough to do all of these things without cheating, without stealing. He just needed to stop cheating. All of the IELTS traps are used to catch cheaters. Like Leo's character, most IELTS students don't cheat because they are bad people. They cheat because they lack confidence, they are scared that they're going to fail, and then they get desperate and resort to listening to these tricks and cheats and hacks. And the most fascinating thing is this movie is a true story. He now actually works for the FBI, and credit card companies have paid him millions of dollars to help prevent future criminals taking advantage of the system. If you believe that you're good enough and you don't cheat, the examiner is going to give you your real score on test day. And you'll be rewarded with a new life in a new country, getting paid way more than you currently are. You are more than capable of doing that. You just have to show them.
Made it across, didn't die.
I'm going to give you the most common idioms used by real Band 9 students. And for each idiom, I'll also give you a Band 9 sample answer. We've helped hundreds of students get a Band 9 in the IELTS speaking test, and we took all of their practice tests and analysed them using AI and identified the most common idioms that they used. And at the end of the video, we're going to show you the number of idioms the Band 9 students actually use. Hint, it is much, much lower than you think, and reveal the biggest mistake that students make when it comes to idioms so that you can avoid that and improve your score. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first idiom is to bite the bullet. Bite as in to bite something, and a bullet, something that you put in a gun, to bite the bullet. What to bite the bullet means is to do something difficult or unpleasant with bravery. So you don't want to do something very, very difficult or unpleasant, but you do it anyway. You're brave and you do it. So where does this come from? Well, this actually comes from the battlefield, from war. So many, many years ago, if you had a wound, if you were shot or stabbed or whatever it is, and you needed a very unpleasant procedure from the doctor, there wasn't any anesthetic, there wasn't any painkillers. So what they would do is they would give you a bullet and tell you to bite down on that bullet. I don't know if this helps or not, but that is where it comes from. And understanding where idioms comes from really helps you remember them and use them properly. So let's pick a real question and I'll answer it and use to bite the bullet in the answer. I didn't really want to study law, but I was the only one in my family ever to get high grades in their A-levels. So my mother sat me down one day and said, it's either medicine or law. So I went to a hospital on work experience and fainted when I saw the sight of blood. I'm too squeamish for medicine, so I decided just to bite the bullet and study law. Now, some common collocations of this idiom are to bite the bullet. It's normally to bite the bullet, not bite the bullet. I decided to bite the bullet. I chose to bite the bullet, and I had to bite the bullet. And the correct pronunciation of this is to stress or emphasize bite. Bite the bullet, not bite the bullet. The next idiom is a piece of cake. A piece of cake means that something is very easy. And we often use this when we are reassuring someone who is worried about something. So if my little boy was worried about his maths test, I would say, don't worry, it's going to be a piece of cake. You don't always use it to help someone or give advice to someone. We normally talk about it just when we are describing something that is simple, that is easy to do. Where does this come from?
Well, there's quite a debate about where this comes from, but the easiest way to think about a piece of cake is that it's pleasant. It is easy to eat a piece of cake. It is a very nice thing. You might also hear the idiom, it was a cake walk. That means walking around looking at cakes. A very pleasant, nice, easy thing to do. To be honest, compared to practicing law, teaching English is a piece of cake. To give you a concrete example, to qualify as a lawyer takes around 6 years of study and work experience. To qualify as an English teacher only takes 6 weeks. The pay obviously isn't as good, but the students, the clients are much nicer and friendlier. A common mistake that we hear a lot with a piece of cake is to drop the article, to just say, it's piece of cake. If you make that mistake, it's not going to improve your IELTS score. It's going to lower your IELTS score. So don't just pick these and use them without really learning them properly. And again, the pronunciation is a piece of cake. You're stressing piece rather than cake. Next is a very, very old idiom, kill two birds with one stone. What this means is to accomplish two goals with one action. And this actually comes from Greek mythology. It is thousands of years old, and the story of Icarus, where they killed a bird with one stone, but they were able to get the feathers, that's one goal, and to build wings to fly out of a cave. That's another goal. But a good way to remember this is just think of something in your everyday simple life and think of one action that you take that achieves two different goals. So let's get a real question and I will use this idiom in the answer. Yes, I actually bought my wife a diamond ring last Christmas. So my wife's birthday is in November and Christmas is obviously in December. So I decided to kill two birds with one stone and buy one present for her birthday and Christmas. And she was very happy with that because she got one nice expensive ring rather than two less expensive gifts. A common mistake that we see with this one is to use kill in its present simple form rather than killed, K-I-L-L-E-D, in its past form. So if you're talking about the past, just like I did in that question or that answer, I used killed two birds with one stone, not kill two birds with one stone. You could also say I decided to kill two birds with one stone, or I chose to kill two birds with one stone. Just make sure that you're not taking the idiom and inserting it into the sentence without thinking about tense, without thinking about grammar. The next idiom is to let the cat out of the bag. To let the cat out of the bag is to reveal a secret, often by mistake. Where does this come from? Well, think about it. If you had a cat in a bag and it was let out of the bag, would it be easy to put that cat back into the bag? It would be very, very difficult. And this is the same with secrets. Once you reveal a secret, once it is out there into the world, you cannot take it back. So that is where to let the cat out of the bag comes from. If you count watches as jewelry, then yes. For my last birthday, my 40th birthday, my wife bought me a very special watch that I've been looking at and desiring for many, many years. The funny story about that is that my credit card and my wife's credit card are the same. So whenever my wife bought it, it pinged on my phone and I got an alert from my favorite watch boutique, and it was the exact amount of money that was for this watch because I had been looking at this watch for ages. So the phone kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit, but it was still a very nice gift and a nice surprise. The pronunciation of this is to stress or emphasize cat and bag. Let the cat out of the bag. Let the cat out of the bag. Common mistake that we see with this one is again missing out the articles. Let cat out of bag. You shouldn't take the idiom and then say it, partly. You shouldn't use it incorrectly. A lot of students believe that if you just use idioms, and it doesn't matter if you use them correctly or not, you're going to get bonus points and you're going to get a high score. Again, if you use it incorrectly, you're lowering your score, not improving your score. The next idiom is don't put all your eggs in one basket. What this means is don't concentrate all of your resources or all of your effort into one single area. in order to minimize risk. Where does this come from? Well, quite literally, if you had lots of chickens, lots of hens that were laying eggs, and you put all of your eggs into one basket, if you drop the basket, all of your eggs would be destroyed. We often use this to talk about our careers or work or investment strategy. For example, don't put all of your money into one stock. Don't put all your eggs into one basket. Put them into many, many different places, and then you're minimizing risk. It's basically about diversification. Probably not, because with the developments in AI recently, I don't think there are going to be IELTS teachers or even any teachers in the future. I think it would be very foolish for me to put all my eggs in one basket and just hope for the best and hope that IELTS and teaching lasts forever. But honestly, I don't think it will. The next idiom is once in a blue moon, which means it happens rarely. So you're talking about frequency, you're talking about how often something happens, and this thing happens rarely. Probably less than once a year. This is quite a literal idiom because literally it is rare to have a blue moon, but it does happen sometimes. This refers to, I think it happens once every 3 years or once every 2 or 3 years, you will have 2 moons in one calendar month. So once in a blue moon means something that doesn't happen very often. I used to go out nearly every night, but since I've had kids, it's really once in a blue moon. Most of my friends have either settled down with kids like me or they have moved away. So it's quite rare to have an occasion where a group of friends are all together at the same time. Sometimes at Christmas, when a lot of our friends visit Ireland during the Christmas period, or in the summertime when a lot of our friends have time off, I might go out, but it is quite a rare occasion these days. A common mistake that we see with once in a blue moon is trying to use it when it's not really appropriate to use it. A lot of students have been taught that if you use this idiom and it's really easy to use because it's talking about frequency, which is quite a basic function of English, that it will automatically bump your scores, kind of like easy points. Students will insert this in unusual situations. Remember, you're only using it when the examiner asks you, how often do you do that? This might come up in part 1, it might come up in part 2, it might come up in part 3, but probably part 1. But if you don't get a question, how often do you do something, you don't have to use it. You won't get a lower score because you didn't use once in a blue moon. Only use it when you can use it and when you are actually talking about something that happens very, very rarely, like once every few years. The next one, I'm going to give you 2 idioms in one: burn the midnight oil and burn the candle at both ends. They have similar meanings, but are slightly different. So I'm going to answer a question and use both of them in the same answer. So burn the midnight oil is talking about things that are difficult. You're working hard on something. You are literally sitting up at midnight working on something. So we would often talk about work or studying, and burning the midnight oil, that means that you're working very, very hard at something. It doesn't have to be at nighttime, it just means that you are working very, very hard on something. And where does this come from? Well, before electricity, our main source of light would have been oil lamps. So you would have lit an oil lamp and used that oil. So if you were burning the midnight oil, it means that you weren't sleeping. It means that you were working at midnight, meaning you're working very hard, burning the midnight oil. Now, to burn the candle at both ends has a similar meaning, but slightly different. Burning the midnight oil doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It isn't negative per se. It's quite positive. You're working hard on something. Burning the candle at both ends means that you're working too much. You are exhausting yourself. Now, where does this come from? It actually comes from France, where they would, like everywhere else, use candles for light. But if you were an aristocrat, if you were very, very rich, you wouldn't burn the candle on one end. You would turn the candle horizontal and you would light both ends. And what this meant was that you were wasteful, that you were rich and you were just wasteful for waste's sake. But over the years, the meaning has changed to mean that you are working too hard and you are exhausting yourself. It's often used in the context of people who work very hard, so they spend a lot of time and energy in work, and then they party too much after. So it's, typical lawyer, for example, or a banker who is working very, very hard all day and then going out all night. They're burning the candle at both ends and they're going to exhaust themselves. Yes, I used to burn the candle at both ends. I had a very much work hard, play hard attitude because I was a lawyer. Lawyers are expected to work, 80 to 100 hours a week, but we would often go out to bars and restaurants after work to blow off steam and to de-stress, which isn't really sustainable. Now I do still burn the midnight oil. I work very, very hard on my career, but you're more likely to find me tucked up in bed by 9 p.m. than to be out partying. The next idiom is at the drop of a hat. And this means to do something quickly, immediately, and without any hesitation. So without even thinking about it, without debating it in your mind, you just do it. Where does this come from? Well, many, many years ago, hundreds of years ago, everybody wore hats. If you look at pictures from a long time ago, you'll see that everyone, well, in this country anyway, wore a hat. And if people were going to fight or run a race or compete in some way, what people would do is they would take their hat off, and when they dropped their hat, that was the sign that the fight was going to begin or the race was about to begin. So people would drop their hat and you started immediately without thinking about it. We actually rent our home. We could afford to buy a home, but we really value our independence and freedom. If you own a home, you're kind of stuck in that location because it can take a very long time to sell that home. But if you rent, you can move anywhere at the drop of a hat. The next idiom is cry over spilt milk. And this means not to waste time thinking about something, thinking negative thoughts about something that you cannot change, that has already happened. Where does this come from? Literally, if you spill milk, is there any point in crying about spilling milk? No, you can't put it back into the bottle. You can't change that scenario. The thing I dislike most about my job is dealing with people who only focus on the negative, especially when they are given negative feedback. That could be students, that could be employees, but people who make mistakes and don't learn from them. So for example, I give a lot of feedback on student essays, and some students see mistakes and they're like, great, now I know what my mistakes are and I can improve. Other students will just cry about it for days and they'll cry about it for weeks. They're like, I'm going to fail. It's like, there's no point crying over spilt milk. You made the mistake, now learn from it. The next idiom is you can't judge a book by its cover. This means that you should not judge people or things based on their appearance. Normally people, but can also include things. The origin of this is quite obvious. If you go into a bookshop, you will see lots of covers of books, but you actually need to read the book to judge it. You can't go in and say, I don't like that book, I think it will be terrible, based on the cover, because you actually have to read it to understand it. And we apply this to people. You can't judge a person based on their appearance. Very rarely, actually, because I'm a firm believer in you can't judge a book by its cover, and we should judge people not on what clothes they wear and their appearance, but by their character and the things that come out of their mouth. My wife firmly disagrees with this because she says someone who gets millions of views on YouTube shouldn't be wearing the same shirt every day. So she does encourage me to go and buy new clothes, but I do it begrudgingly. The next one is don't count your chickens before they hatch. Another chicken idiom. And this means don't assume something will be successful or something will happen until it actually occurs. So you shouldn't assume that watching this video and using these idioms is going to guarantee a band 9. You should actually go and do the test and see if you get a band 9. Don't count your chickens. Now the full version of this idiom is don't count your chickens before they hatch,
But English speakers normally just say, don't count your chickens. You can use either of them in the test, but I think it's just simpler and easier to remember and use the shorter form, don't count your chickens. Now, this actually comes from Aesop's fables about a milkmaid. This milkmaid was going to use milk to make butter, and then she was going to sell the butter to buy eggs, and then she was going to hatch the eggs and raise chickens, and then sell the chickens to buy a new dress. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. She didn't get her dress, so don't count your chickens. I prefer to buy luxury watches than jewelry. I'm not sure if you could count a luxury watch as jewelry, but the thing about jewelry is like diamond rings, necklaces, things like that. Often as soon as you buy them, as soon as you walk out of the jewelers, they lose value. Whereas many of the watches that I've purchased have actually gone up in value. I don't want to count my chickens, but if I were to sell these watches, I probably would make a lot more money on them than I paid for them. So that's why I prefer luxury timepieces over simple jewelry. The next idiom is to go the extra mile, and this means to put more effort or to work harder than what is required. So for example, instead of making an IELTS idioms video where I just say all the idioms and go through them quickly, I go the extra mile and talk about the origin and give you example sentences. This is actually a biblical reference from the Sermon on the Mount. And in the Bible, it says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. And many people interpret this as you should always do more than is required of you. My wife does the vast majority of the cooking, not because she's necessarily a better cook, but the thing I love about my wife is in whatever she does, she goes the extra mile. So if I was cooking steak, I would just cook the steak and eat it with a little bit of bread. But my wife will have like 3 different sauces and balsamic vinegar and 2 different olive oils and 4 different types of potato. She really does go the extra mile when it comes to cooking in our house. The next idiom is raining cats and dogs. This is very useful because it is used to describe the weather, and the weather will often come up during part 1 or part 2 or part 3. And it describes very, very heavy rain, to rain cats and dogs. Now there's a bit of a debate about where this comes from, and it's quite unusual, but the one that I find that helps you remember it and is a very vivid image is back in the day, many, many years ago, countries and cities didn't have the same drainage that we have these days. And when it would rain hard, when it would rain heavy, the city streets would flood. What are the most common pets in most countries? Cats and dogs. So those cats and dogs would actually drown, and whenever the storm was over, people would go into the streets and there would be cats and dogs lying lifeless all over the place. They had drowned. It's not a very nice image, but you'll definitely remember it. Yes and no. Where I live is one of the most beautiful places in the world. We're spoiled for choice in terms of outdoor activities and beautiful places. Like on our doorstep, we have beaches, forests, lakes, mountains. But unfortunately, it's Ireland, so it's normally raining cats and dogs, so you don't really get to enjoy it. A big mistake that I see with this one is getting the cats and dogs mixed up and saying dogs and cats. When students don't really learn this properly and just see a list of idioms, they go into the test and they're like, it was raining dogs and cats. A native English speaker or someone with a very high level of English will spot this immediately. And it is basically you holding up a sign saying, I'm not very good at English. So make sure you use it properly. I also see students using the wrong tense of rain. So it rained cats and dogs if you're talking about the past, to talk about something that normally happens. So it's normally raining cats and dogs, or it rains cats and dogs. You need to understand the verb tense of the word rain and use it correctly. Again, if you're saying it's raining cats and dogs yesterday,
that's incorrect, and it's a big flag to the examiner that you don't really know what you're talking about. The next idiom is to throw in the towel. So a towel that you use to dry yourself that you after a shower. And this means to stop something that is either very, very difficult or has become impossible, to throw in the towel. And this comes from boxing. So if guys are boxing and one boxer is getting so beat up that it is impossible for them to continue, continuing is not going to result in victory. It is going to result in them getting badly injured. Their corner, their trainer, will throw a towel into the ring. And whenever a towel is thrown into the ring, the referee stops it immediately to throw in the towel. As you can tell from looking at me, no, I don't have a very healthy diet. I do try. I normally get up in the morning and have a healthy breakfast and have a healthy lunch, but it's so easy just to throw in the towel when you get home after a hard day's work and your wife has a beautiful meal prepared, there's a bottle of wine on the table, and your kids' half-eaten chocolate is lying all around the kitchen. So I do quite well most of the day and then fail in the evenings. The next idiom is cross that bridge when you come to it. People often say we will or we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, or I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. And what this means is to deal with a problem or a situation when it actually occurs in the future, not to worry about something that has not happened yet. So imagine you are out for a walk and someone starts talking about a bridge that is miles away and they're worrying about crossing that bridge. You would say, let's cross that bridge when we come to it. So where this comes from is, many, many years ago, bridges weren't free and they weren't reliable. So often people would collect tolls, collect taxes to cross a bridge, or the bridge wasn't very sturdy and crossing that bridge could result in you falling off or the bridge collapsing and you dying. So it's talking about an unpleasant or difficult situation that is coming up in the future, but you shouldn't worry about that. We'll worry about that when we get there. Let's just focus on the here and now. It's not something I really like to think about because in the back of my mind, I know IELTS teachers and all educators are doomed because AI is going to replace them. Like, why would a student hire a human that is not as good as a machine that can do it at half the price or a fraction of the price and do it much more effectively? We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but I don't think it's that far away. But in the meantime, I'm just going to enjoy teaching for as long as I can. Next, we have two Roman idioms, or idioms that originate from the city of Rome. Rome obviously was one of the greatest empires that the world has ever seen, and it has a huge influence on the English language and a huge number of languages to this day. And the first one is Rome wasn't built in a day. And this means that significant accomplishments, so to accomplish something big, a big goal, takes time. It takes a long time to achieve something significant. So back in the day, many, many years ago, Rome was the greatest city in the world, but it was built over centuries. It took a very, very, very long time to build Rome into the greatest city in the world. And we often use this when someone is trying to get us to do something too quickly. So if somebody said to me, you need to have the best, biggest YouTube channel in the world, well, Rome wasn't built in a day. We'll do it one video at a time. It's often used as well to console someone who is feeling bad about not achieving something. So, if my little boy was like, we lost a football match, I'm not very good at football. Rome wasn't built in a day. You will get better at football, but you won't get better at football right now. You need to keep working consistently hard into the future, and then you will be a footballing superstar, which he wants to be. The thing I hate about social media is the fact that these companies have so much power to change their systems and change their algorithms, but they decide not to for money. So to give you an example from my work and my job, to become a famous IELTS YouTuber is actually quite easy. All you have to do is come up with some clickbait titles like hacks and tricks and predictions and things like that, and put a pretty girl on the thumbnail. But that doesn't mean that the person making that video knows anything about IELTS. It just means that they know how to trick the algorithm. You know, I understand Rome wasn't built in a day, that, you know, it takes time to fix platforms and change algorithms, but these are, you know, sometimes trillion-dollar companies. If they wanted to get these people off their platform, they could, but they decide not to because popular is more important than, you know, educating the public properly. The next one is, when in Rome, do what the Romans do. But this is often shortened to when in Rome. So you'll very rarely hear native English speakers say, when in Rome, do what the Romans do. Just say, when in Rome. And what this means is that when you are visiting a foreign place, when you are a tourist or a visitor in a country that you're not from, you should respect the customs and respect the religion, the culture, the customs of that place. And this comes from the Catholic faith, where Milan and Rome had different days for fasting. So in many religions, you have fast days where you don't eat anything. And in Milan, it was on a Sunday, but in Rome, it was on a Saturday. So they were talking about, like, when do you fast? Do you fast on a Saturday or fast on a Sunday? When in Rome, you should respect their culture and you should fast on their fast day. When you're home, do it normally. No, I actually hate it, and it makes me feel very uncomfortable. I'm from Ireland, and in Ireland, it is quite rare for someone to take your photo. And if they want to take your photo, it is rude to just take it without asking you. So it's customary just to say, do you mind if I take a photo? And if somebody says, yes, you can take it, but if they say no, you should definitely not take it. My wife, who is from Vietnam, in Vietnam, they have a very, very different culture. They are taking photos all of the time, and they will think nothing of just taking a photo of you. And if I get angry with someone for taking a photo, they'll think that I'm the problem and I'm being rude. So, you know, when in Rome. So now you know all of these different idioms that Band 9 students use. Does that mean that you can use them in the IELTS test and automatically get a higher score? Yes and no. And this is the most important point in the video. If you don't watch this bit, you probably will mess up your test, fail, waste a lot of money. Please do watch it. So what I'm about to say is very different from most IELTS YouTubers and most IELTS teachers. So let's just look at data and facts. None of this is my opinion. All the things I'm about to tell you are straight facts. So when we analysed all of our Band 9 students who got Band 9 in the real IELTS speaking test, what were the number of idioms that they actually used? And the number is quite shocking, 1.2 on average. This means that many of them didn't use idioms at all. Most of them maybe used 1 or 2, but there was quite a variation. And it was quite rare for students to use, say, more than 4 or 5. Why is this? And why are many of you, typing in the comments right now, that is wrong, you must use idioms to get a higher score? Let me explain. So if you go to the official band descriptors for IELTS speaking, you'll find them online. What it says for lexical resource, which is basically a fancy way of saying vocabulary, for Band 7 is, uses some less common and idiomatic vocabulary and shows some awareness of style and collocation with some inappropriate choices. So what you'll hear from most IELTS YouTubers is you must use idioms to get a 7 or above. And this is a misconception. It is a misunderstanding of the official marking criteria. Most IELTS YouTubers have not been examiners and they don't really know what these actually mean.
let's look up the dictionary definition for idiomatic. What does idiomatic actually mean? Because most YouTubers and most students think that idiomatic means idioms. Just use lots of idioms, you'll get a band 7, 8, or 9. Does it actually mean that? Well, if we look at Cambridge Dictionary, the definition of idiomatic is containing expressions that are natural and correct. And this is what idiomatic actually means for the purposes of IELTS. Idiomatic means natural English. In other words, English that a native English speaker would use. Natural idiomatic expressions. It does contain idioms, but it also contains slang, phrasal verbs, informal words, colloquialisms, and many other forms of natural English. Because if you are studying English in school and you're just using textbooks, that is not the most natural English that you will hear. It's only when you move to a native English-speaking country and start copying these idiomatic phrases and expressions that you sound like a native English speaker. And that is what the examiners are listening out for. They're not listening for how many idioms did you use. They are listening to your whole performance and then thinking, are they using some idiomatic expressions or not? And that includes idioms, but it includes many, many other things. So have I just wasted your time with this lesson? You're telling us that you should learn these idioms, and then you're telling us not to learn these idioms. So let me tell you what we tell our VIP students. When we're teaching them vocabulary, we use something called the birthday cake analogy or the birthday cake method. If you think about a birthday cake, it looks very fancy and it looks very, very impressive. But if you think about the ingredients of a fancy looking birthday cake, they are the most basic foods, the most basic ingredients in the world. Things like milk, sugar, flour, water, butter. These are things that can be found in any shop in any country in the world. They are simple, they are basic. Most birthday cakes are made up 98-97% of these simple basic ingredients. But the sprinkles on top make it look fancy. That's the exact approach that we teach our VIP students. 97-98% of the words that you use are going to be simple, everyday, basic words, because that is how the English language functions. That is how any language functions. Then you can use some high-level words, you could use some idioms, you should use some phrasal verbs, you could sprinkle those on top, but it's going to actually be quite rare when you use them. The examiner is not looking for you to use them in every single sentence. Now, if you go back in this video and listen to my answers, even though I tried to use idioms in every single answer, if you broke down the words of all of those answers, 90-95% of the words that I used are simple, basic, everyday words. Remember the birthday cake analogy. So it is great having idioms in your toolkit and you can use them appropriately and accurately, but you don't have to use them. If you were building a house, would you rather have a massive toolkit that allows you to do many, many things, or would you just like to have a hammer? Teaching you these idioms is about expanding the vocabulary you know how to use. And the key word there is use. You are not learning vocabulary. You are learning to use vocabulary effectively. Please, please, please do not do two things. Number one, do not memorize these idioms and try and insert them, force them into every single answer. You are going to fail because it will be inappropriate, you'll use them too much, and you will use them incorrectly. The words will be incorrect, the collocations will be incorrect, and the pronunciation probably will be incorrect. Try to incorporate them into your everyday use of the English language, use them properly and use them appropriately. That is the difference between a Band 6 student and a Band 9 student. The second thing you should not do is learn lists of idioms. The reason why this is a very, very long video and why I'm talking a lot and explaining all of this to you and why I didn't just give you a list of idioms and just round them off and show you examples was to demonstrate to you that you should use them appropriately. I could not take those idioms and do a speaking test and use all of them in the speaking test. In fact, when I did the speaking test, I got a band 9 because I'm a native English speaker, of course, but I used 0 idioms. That is because I'm not being judged on my use of idioms alone. I'm being judged on all of the words that I'm using, not just the fancy high-level idioms. Well done for making it this far in the video. By this stage, you should be ready to start taking some practice questions and start practicing at home. And we're going to give you more than 1,000 of them in the following part of this video. But not only that, we're not just going to give you a bunch of questions. We're going to show you how to use practice questions at home to really, really improve your score. So don't just skip ahead in the video and find the link and download all the questions and start practicing. Watch the next part of the video that is going to show you what not to do, how not to practice, and how to practice. Kind of simple do's and don'ts for practicing at home. It's really going to accelerate your speaking ability and improve your score in a much shorter period of time. Let's start off with the don'ts. These are things that you should not do, and these are things that band 7, 8, and 9 students do not do when they're using IELTS speaking questions. Number 1, don't get overwhelmed. Sometimes when we give students hundreds and hundreds of questions, they get completely overwhelmed and they think that their job is to analyze and look at and practice every single question. And they need to be aware of all the different questions. You do not need to do that. Don't look at hundreds of questions and think that you must have an answer for all of them or be aware of all of them. Just use them in the way that we're going to show you in this video. So important, don't get overwhelmed. Number 2, don't worry if you see a topic in there that you're not an expert in. Remember that it is a speaking test. It is not a knowledge test or an intelligence test. Number 3, you should not try to prepare answers and memorize them and try to improve your speaking score in that way. IELTS examiners are trained to spot this, and they can easily spot it, and what they will do is they will ask you other questions that you were not prepared for, and they will base your score on those unprepared questions. Because IELTS is not a test of memorization, because it is testing communication. You don't use memorization when you're communicating with people in any language, so don't try to prepare answers for any of them. Number 4, don't try and anticipate the different topics that come up. If you go through all of these, you will see that there are no common topics. You could be asked about anything. So you'll see lots of things online about YouTube videos saying these are the common topics that might come up, or here are the predicted topics that might come up. This is just to get you to click on those videos. None of those are actually real, so don't try and do that. This is a big one. Don't compare your performance with so-called band 9 students that you find on YouTube. This is going to damage your confidence, and it is also highly misleading. Now, not to bash any other channels, I'm not doing that, or I'm not going to mention specific channels, but just looking at those, band 9 mock speaking tests or band 8 or whatever they are, the vast majority of them either are not actually band 9 or band 8, or the people giving feedback are not real teachers. Those videos are incredibly popular, so what's happening is companies are hiring fake teachers and then hiring models and actresses to make IELTS videos about speaking, but none of them are accurate. So if you're comparing yourself to those people, it's not a fair comparison, and if you're watching too many of those videos, you might be getting bad advice from unqualified teachers. And the last don't is something that a lot of students don't really think about. Don't take these questions and look constantly for feedback. So some students, what they do is they'll look at the questions and then they'll ask their teachers or some online services to just constantly do mock speaking tests and constantly do feedback tests with them and give them lots and lots of feedback. Those things are important. You should be practicing, you should be getting feedback, But the real improvement comes after you get feedback. So if a teacher gives you feedback, for example, on pronunciation or fluency or grammar or vocabulary, doing another mock speaking test is not actually going to improve those things at all. There is such a thing as too much feedback. So don't take these and just do lots and lots and lots of feedback sessions. Work on improving the things that you need to work on, and you're going to see far more improvement if you work on your weaknesses. Okay, let's get into the things that band 7, 8 and 9 students do when they are using these practice questions. Okay, so Chris here. This is how you find the article with all of the practice questions in it. I'm going to show you how to access them in 3 steps. So step 1, what you're going to do is you're going to go to Google and you're going to type in IELTS Speaking. Once you have IELTS Speaking up in Google, you're going to scroll through all the different websites and go to IELTS Advantage. So it might be on the first page, it might be on the second page, probably be in and around the middle of the first page. You're just going to click on IELTS Speaking, how to get a band 7 or above, IELTS Advantage. You're going to click on that. That's step 1. One of the big things successful students do is they treat each part of the speaking test separately. So part 1, part 2, and part 3 are very, very different. Different types of questions, different types of answers, and the examiners are thinking about different things when they are assessing you. So what you should not do is just take some part 1 questions, a part 2 question, some part 3 questions, and then try and answer them all in the same way. Band 7, 8, and 9 students don't do that. Keep watching this video, but at the end of the video, I'll give you some links so that you can understand the differences between the different parts. It's very, very important. Number 2, Band 8 and 9 students understand the marking criteria. It is far more important that you use these questions to understand the marking criteria than just to go through all of these questions. Use the questions to test yourself, to practice, to think about your performance and think about how are you doing in relation to the marking criteria. That's the only thing that matters, because that's the only thing that the examiners are thinking about on test day. And we'll show you how to do that when we give you the VIP technique at the end. Number 3, get your speaking checked at least once by a real IELTS professional. Now, I'm not saying that because I want you to buy our services. We're normally completely sold out. I'm saying this because it is so easy to spot. If you're a real IELTS professional, an ex-examiner, it's so easy to spot little things that the student is doing that will lead to failure. And it's so easy to fix these things. Now, many of you don't want to spend any money on this, but it is a lot cheaper than failing your test. And the difference between failing your test and doing a mock speaking test with a real professional is the real test costs a lot more and you get no feedback. If you do a mock speaking test with a real professional, it's much cheaper and they are going to give you real actionable feedback. You're going to know what's going on, what your weaknesses are, what your score is, and how to improve your score. But please be careful. Most people calling themselves ex-examiners are not really ex-examiners, and your local IELTS teacher who has very little experience and has never been an examiner probably will not give you very good feedback. It is better to find a source that you trust, that you know that they're real ex-examiners and they really know what they're talking about. In general, the more expensive ones are going to be more reliable, the cheaper ones are going to be unreliable. We do provide that service, but we're normally sold out. If you want more information, get in touch with us. But before you say, oh my God, he's only making this video to try and make money from us, I'm going to show you how you can get real feedback, accurate feedback for free at home at 0 cost. This is the same technique we give our VIP students. It is extremely effective, but you're going to need a few things. So we're going to go through it step by step. Step 2, it should bring you to this page on our website, IELTS Speaking in 2023. This page has a lot of information on it. What you're going to do is you're going to scroll down and you're going to keep scrolling. You're going to keep scrolling. You're going to keep scrolling until you get to IELTS Speaking Topics. Now let's go back to the video and I'll show you how to click on the article you need in step 3. First of all, you're going to need practice questions, real practice questions. We're going to show you how to access those at the end of the video so you've got those. The next thing is you're going to need either a phone or a laptop. You're going to need some kind of electronic device that will record your voice. Most laptops, most phones will be able to do this. Please don't ask, should you use a laptop or should you use a phone? It doesn't matter. Just pick something that you have that you can use to record your voice. The next thing you need to do is download some kind of recording app or program to your phone or to your laptop. Now, all you have to do is go into your App Store or Google. I'm not going to name specific apps because they change all the time. And it's so easy for you to just find this yourself. The next thing you want to do is sign up for a service that automatically transcribes your voice. So let me give you some examples, but again, these change over time. Do your own research. So on an Apple phone, in the notes function, you can just press the transcribe button and it will transcribe what you say. There's also a service that you can use on your computer called otter.ai. They have a free version of that software that will record your voice and transcribe it. But as I said before, do your own research, find a tool, and you'll be able to get this done. But you do need one to record your voice so you can listen back and one to transcribe it. There might be some apps out there that do both. If there are, put it in the comments, let people know what you found and help each other. Okay, so that's all the tech setup done. Next, what you're going to do is you're going to pick one part of the test, either part 1, part 2, or part 3. Don't do a full test, just pick one part and focus on one thing at a time. So for part 1, you're going to use about 9 questions. Part 2, you're only going to use 1 question. And for part 3, you're going to pick 3 or 4 questions. Make sure that you don't study these questions. We want to recreate the real test as much as possible. Don't look at easy questions and try and prepare answers, all right? Just pick questions from the list. Don't look at them. Don't study them. Just pick them. Look at each question and answer it as if an examiner is asking you that question. So read each question and answer it as if you are in the real test. If you mess up, don't worry about it. This is just practice. Next, I want you to download the official marking criteria. I'll put a link below, but if you just Google speaking marking criteria, it should come up on Google as well. What you're going to do is you're going to listen back and you're going to think about your performance. You're going to read the marking criteria and think about which band you should get based on your own performance. If you don't understand the marking criteria, you don't understand the bands, I'll put a link at the end of the video that will show you in more detail what the bands mean. As you're listening back, think about your biggest weaknesses. So if you were, you couldn't really answer the questions, fluency is an issue. If you can't understand anything that you say, pronunciation is probably an issue. Or if you're making lots of vocabulary mistakes or grammar mistakes, that's your biggest issue. The great thing about this technique is when you're in the real test, you're unaware of the mistakes that you are making. But when you're listening back and just focusing on your mistakes and focusing on your performance, you'll be able to pick out things that you were completely unaware of, and you'll be able to fix those things. And that takes us on to our next point. You're going to look at the transcription, whatever service you used that will write out your answers, and you're going to analyze that in more detail. So the first thing you're going to analyze is, did you actually answer the question? Look at the question, look at the transcription. Did you actually answer the question? And did you develop your answer enough? You can also analyze your fluency. If there are lots of ums and ahs and pauses in the transcription, if you're jumping around a lot, then fluency might be an issue for you. If the transcription cannot understand most of the words, like the words are completely different, then that is a pronunciation issue. You can also analyze your vocabulary. Did you repeat too many words? Are you trying to use words that you don't really understand? Did you struggle with that topic because of a limited vocabulary? And then with grammar, what you can do is you can put that transcript into something like Grammarly, for example, or there are lots of other options, and it will highlight all of the grammar mistakes that you made, and you'll be able to identify your key grammar mistakes. For example, if you are using the wrong article before every noun, you need to work on articles. So this technique is not actually about improving your speaking yet. This technique is to give you feedback. As I said before, feedback doesn't improve your speaking instantly, but what you do after does. So for example, if you look at the transcript and you messed up every article, being aware of that is just the first step. You're not going to magically improve your speaking by just being aware of that, but you will magically improve if you work on those things. And some of you watching right now might be thinking, well, that's a lot of work. Yes, it is, but it's a lot less work than going and watching a bunch of tips and tricks videos, believing that they're going to help you, and then failing the test over and over again and not knowing why. That is a lot of work. This is actually a lot less stressful because you will be in control and you can do it all for free at home at your own pace. Again, we're here to give you things that are actually going to improve your score, not tips and tricks that make you happy. So step 3, you should be here, IELTS Speaking Topics. You're going to scroll down and you will see a link, IELTS Speaking Topics, the Ultimate Guide. Click on that and it will give you access to all of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of questions that you will need for your speaking practice. Well done, you made it to the last part of the video. So we're going to do something we've never done before. So you've probably seen that we do lots of mock speaking tests here in our studio, but this is the first time that we've brought a student back. So before we had this student who got a band 8, but I thought that she was actually capable of a much, much higher band, a band 9, which is a huge improvement. So she went through a lot of the same lessons in this video that you have just went through. And I want to show you the massive improvement that she made just by following the steps in this video. So without further ado, let's look and see if she did get her band 9. Let's start off by talking about exercise. How often do you exercise?
When you talk about exercise, I don't really exercise that much, but then I do other forms of exercise, if you can take that into the category exercise. So I like to dance, I like to do yoga, I like to go for a walk. So I'm sure that's included in exercise. So if you talk about that, I think every day, at least an hour. So yeah, I do like to take care of my body and I do like to invest in my body.
What's your favorite exercise?
So I think I'd like to say dance, because it's funny because it's mindless. You don't realize you're exercising. When you're dancing, it's just 1 hour of catharsis. You're just going and sweating it out, and you don't realize that you worked out for an hour. So yeah, I think I'll say dance.
Are there any exercises you do not like?
I wouldn't say I don't like. I do like lifting weights, but it's not one of my favorite part of the exercise. It's something which I find monotonous, something which I find cumbersome, something which I find boring. So yes, lifting weights.
Do you prefer to exercise indoors or outdoors?
I think both. When the weather allows, then outdoors. But otherwise, I'm more of an indoor person. I don't mind doing yoga every single day in my room. I know like a lot of people don't enjoy that. They need an environment, they need a setup, they need to go to the gym, which is also indoors. But I do enjoy indoors and I do enjoy just exercising in my home, in my room. And that being said, I also enjoy working out in outside facility as well. Like I like going for walks, I like going for a run. So yeah, I think both.
Now let's talk about weekends. How do you normally spend your weekends?
Weekends, I usually have more classes. I'm a yoga teacher, so my weekends are not a normal weekend for other people where they go out for lunches, dinners, and celebrate. For me, weekends are more heavy on work. But if I can say that Monday is my weekend or Tuesday is my weekend, then I like to watch movies. I really like watching Netflix and I like to spend time with my husband. I also like cooking And that's the time which I get for myself. So yes, I think I like spending it in the house and really giving that time to myself and my husband.
Do you like to spend your weekends in your local area, or do you like to travel?
So it depends. It's both. If I have a lot of time to myself, in the sense if I have 2 days off or 3 days off, I like to go out on a vacation, like a mini trip. So I like to go out, probably do like a picnic, go out to a park, or maybe explore any other countryside, any other city. But if it's a short duration, if it's only a day, then probably spend it in the house, like I mentioned earlier.
Are there any interesting things to do in your local area on the weekend?
Yes, there are a lot of coffee shops. And there's a coffee shop right beneath my house, which is very popular in London. It's called Gale's. So yeah, there are a lot of nice places around my neighborhood. But I wouldn't say that I like going to those places because they're very familiar. I would like to go to places which are a little away. So I would like to travel a little bit and enjoy the entire journey of reaching a place. But yes, my neighborhood is also quite friendly and social.
Do you prefer to go out or stay in at the weekend?
So like I mentioned earlier, if it's a short weekend, if it's only a day and a half, then staying in is better for me. And because there are a lot of things that I need to finish, so I prefer staying in. But if it is a longer weekend, like in the sense that you also have a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it's a 3 days, then I like to probably step out and probably explore other neighborhood cities and towns and villages here.
Now let's talk about reading. What was your favorite book when you were a child?
I can't go back that far, like when I was a child, but I do remember somewhere in school, probably towards the end of school, I loved this book called Many Masters, Many Lives. And I think I like to call myself an old soul because when I was a child, I still was very inclined towards spirituality. And I really liked to know where we've come from, where would we go after life, before death, those kind of things. So after death, after life. So that's, I think, a book which rings a bell, which I always get reminded of.
How often do you read?
So as of now, my reading is very education-based. I have a lot of books on yoga, a lot of books on spirituality. I'm very less on fiction, but I try and listen a little bit of fiction as well. So I listen to the audiobooks. It's called Audible. So I have that app with me. So I think when I'm on the tube, when I'm traveling, it's always the Audible, the book, which I listen to. And when I'm at home and when I'm trying to educate myself and I'm trying to know more about yoga, then it's probably, I think, overall an hour a day or maybe sometimes an hour in 2 days.
Mm-hmm. Do you like to read when on holiday?
Depends. Like I said, most of my reading is education-based, so I need to dedicate time to it, to just the reading part of it. But when I'm on vacation, then I don't like to educate myself. So it depends. But sometimes I do like to read. I think when I'm on a vacation, I'd rather go for just listening to a book.
And do you prefer to read physical books or ebooks?
I think I prefer to read physical books. I do have a Kindle as well, but I think it's been longest that I've touched it. I like to have the feel of it, to turn the pages in real. So I do prefer a physical book.
Now let's talk about history.
Mm-hmm.
Do you enjoy watching TV shows about history?
Yes, but I'd like to put it this way. I enjoy history, but I like more of the crime-based histories. There are a lot of events which have happened in certain countries, certain part of towns. So I like to know more about that. I'm very heavy on crime-based series. Mm-hmm. So yes, and sometimes I also like to watch just the history bit as well. Mm-hmm. Like I think I've seen that entire show on Netflix called The Roman Empire or something like that. But that's also because it's very heavy on drama. Mm-hmm. It's very heavy on the crime-based as well. So I think I do have an inclination towards that.
Did you enjoy studying history in school?
As far as I remember, I don't really have a clear memory of reading or learning history in school, which of course we did. It was there in our textbooks. But I think I grew more fond and more interested in history way later when I started reading about civilizations, when I started reading about different areas and regions and how the world was divided and then, invaded by different kingships, if I can call that. So yes, it was only later that I started getting interested in history. So it says, describe a time when you were late for something. So I'm usually a very punctual person and I can't think of any time when I was really late, but there have been a few instances. And one such instance was when I got really, really late was for my work. So I'm new to London and I've started teaching yoga over here. It's been about 6 to 8 months and I'm still understanding the tube work, like how does the commute work over here? How does the bus work over here? And also the timings and everything. So I'm still adjusting myself to the city. So there was this one class I was supposed to reach after 2 classes, which I was already taking in Angel. So there was this one area called Angel. I was taking 2 classes over there. Right after that, there was another class in another area and I was supposed to reach there. This another class wasn't mine, so I was covering for someone and I got like a last moment notification that, can you take this class? And I accepted it, really vouching for it and really saying that I will be there. It was very disheartening for me because by the time I wrapped up the studio and I left from there, I couldn't make it on time. And this is a big professional setback on my end because I shouldn't be doing that. And what happened was that I went for, I thought I'll take a bus. So I took a bus and by the time I was about to reach a certain location, I realized I've taken the wrong bus. So I got down and then I tried to take a train. So by the time I tried to reach the next best train location, I realized that the train station was shut. That is when I started panicking. I started looking for a cab and I started contacting my DM, which is like a manager who's always on call and checking if you're on time or not. And the DM told me this is really sad because it looks like I'll not be able to reach on time. And even 5 minutes late is late for students. So they started asking questions like, why is it that the train station is stopped, like in the sense it's shut? Because probably I think they weren't believing me in that moment. But later when I described everything, I clicked pictures and finally they believed me. And when I reached...
That's the 2 minutes are
Okay.
up. Well done.
All right.
Okay. You've been telling me about a time when you were late, and we're now going to discuss arriving late and being punctual.
Right.
Is it rude to be late if you're meeting a friend?
In a way, yes, because I think I'll say if you're constantly late, if you're always late, it's a yes. It is rude because you're playing with someone's time. Someone has specially dedicated their time to you and vice versa. Even you've dedicated your time to them. So in a way, yes, because that person could have done a lot of things in that much time. But also sometimes no, because you never know what is that person going through. I mean, in the sense, it's a friend, right? It's not a profession. Sometimes I've had my friends complaining that Aparna, it's all right. I mean, you can chill because we're just meeting for a coffee. So it's okay if they get a little bit late. If it's only like 10-15 minutes, it's fine.
What should happen to people if they are consistently late for work?
Well, I think it's a big no because you're answerable for a lot of people and you have to deliver a job, a product, or something in that profession. And if you get late, it's not only you who's suffering, but it's also the entire company who's suffering because of you. So I think they need to learn how to manage their time well. And there should be some kind of a repercussion for that so that they are being more careful and mindful in the future.
What can people do to become more punctual?
Okay, so I have this trick, which is a lot of times I've noticed that people who are constantly late, they take the deadline as the deadline. For example, if they have to be somewhere at 10, they'll think, okay, I have to be there at 10. I'd like to put it the other way. I'll say, keep your time 15 minutes earlier. Say that you have to reach there by 9:45 or probably 9:30 if you have a habit of constantly being late. That way you'll start getting ready earlier, you'll leave the place earlier, you're home earlier, and probably you'll be on time. You can set a time alarm, you can set a timer, you can really make use of these things in order to be on time, I think.
Now let's talk about work productivity. Is it better to work for long, interrupted periods of time or to take multiple small breaks?
In my opinion, I think to take many multiple breaks because it doesn't matter how long you're working. If you've refreshed yourself and if you have come to your full capacity, mental capacity to work, even if you work in short bursts, that could be more productive. And yes, I think that's what I think about work productivity.
Are open plan offices good for productivity?
What do you mean by open plan offices?
So some offices
Cubicles are
have
closed.
cubicles and they're closed, or offices that are closed, and then some offices of just tables in a big room and everyone can see each other working?
All right. Well, it depends. I'm not really sure how it works because either it works for them because it's a very social environment, you can relax and you're not like really just into work, because that can also play with your stress maybe. But in a way also no, because then you have the chances to get distracted sooner. And if you're working in a closed environment, then you can probably take out that small burst of time which I was talking about and just dedicate it to your work.
Some people believe companies should move to a 4-day week. Do you think this would improve overall productivity?
I think I'm a big advocate for that because I really feel there should be a good work-life balance where you're working and also you have time for yourself. When you're constantly only working, which is like 6 days a week, probably that ways you don't have time for yourself, you don't have time for your family, you don't have time for your hobbies and interests, which plays a big role in your stress. So if you have 4 days a week, that means that you have more time for yourself. And by default, you will be able to focus on your work because you've been able to take care of other parts and categories in your life, you know.
Now let's talk about AI in the workplace. Which jobs are most likely to be affected by AI in the future?
I'm not sure, but I think maybe the film industry. I feel that a lot of the editing will be taken care of by AI because I have noticed and I've come across a lot of people who are using only AI for editing on Instagram. So that just rang a bell in my head because I thought, if that is the case, then probably the film industry will be the one which will suffer because most of their jobs are done by human labor, right? So if AI takes over, then it'll make their jobs easier, but also take away jobs from their hands.
If AI takes millions of people's jobs in the future, how will society change?
Financially, I'm not very sure because that will reduce the jobs for a lot of people. But I also feel that people will have more time to themselves and people will have more space to figure out the other kind of jobs that they should be doing. So in a way, a lot of workload, if you look with a positive perspective, a lot of workload will be taken away from them and will give them a lot more space to decide what would they want to do with their time.
And are there any positive consequences of AI replacing millions of workers?
I think this is very similar to what I just mentioned, that yes, you can look at it positively as well. But I did mention that I'm not very sure how will it play financially on people. But the positive side effect or positive effect can be that it can unburden or take away the burden from a lot of people and give them more space and time to utilize in other activities of their life.
So you're hoping to get a band 9, which is a very, very high score. What I will do is I'll give you feedback on part 1, part 2, and part 3 of the test, and then I'll give you feedback on the 4 marking criteria. So to get a band 9, you need top marks in fluency and coherence, grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation. So part 1, what the examiner is looking for is for you to answer the question and develop it a little bit. I think the key hallmark of a band 9 candidate in part 1 is it's like talking to a friend or it's like talking to a colleague. And that's how it felt talking to you. So you were able to answer each question naturally and develop them. You had no problem talking about any of those topics. And I really liked the way you used your own life and your own experiences in that. So it didn't feel like speaking to a robot who prepared answers. It felt like talking to a real human being who's at a very, very high level of English. I also threw in some more unusual topics in there and you were able to cope with those perfectly. So part 1, I have no negative feedback, all very, very good. Part 2 is probably the most challenging part for a lot of students because it's a monologue. So you have to speak for up to 2 minutes. What you did was you decided to choose a real story from your own life. That was a very good choice because it led to a very fluent, coherent answer. So it's much easier to talk about an experience from your own life than it is to make up a story or to talk about something a little bit more abstract. So we would always suggest to students to try and choose something in part 2 related to your own life And then it's much easier then to use vocabulary and grammar as well, especially vocabulary, because you're talking about real things and real experiences, and you weren't trying to, we would say, fetch the language. You weren't thinking of the correct word or the correct grammar structure or the correct tense. You were just talking very coherently and naturally again. And I didn't have to encourage you to speak more. A problem with many students is they'll speak for 1 minute or 1 minute 30 seconds, and then you have to encourage them to speak. I had to do the opposite. I had to stop you, which is which was very, very good. In my opinion, part 3 is the most challenging part, because these topics like arriving late, work productivity, AI in the workplace, these are more abstract, academic type topics when you compare them to part 1, and you did very, very well. What the examiner is looking for is development and answering the question and then really developing it. You did that multiple times by showing both sides of the argument, by using examples. Sometimes you used real examples from your own life, and you had no problem with any of those topics. The reason why towards the end I asked you more and more difficult questions is the examiner will think that you're a very good candidate, so they will ask you more and more difficult questions to see how you cope with them. So even when I asked you about societal changes in the future from AI, like that is a very, very difficult question. Many students in that position would just say, I don't know, or that's difficult, or I've no idea. You attempted the answer and you gave a very, a coherent answer that's related to that topic, and you really developed it well. You could see at the end that you were struggling a little bit with those ideas, but the thing to remember is that it is not an ideas test. It is a test of your English, and you did really, really well. Now let's move on to your scores for each part. So fluency and coherence, we can break that down. Coherence is all about, did you answer the question? So if I asked you about, is it rude to be late if you're meeting a friend? You talk about meeting a friend. You don't talk about being late for work, for example. And every question that I asked you, you answered exactly how it was supposed to be answered. You really stuck to that topic. The other part of coherence is development. So did you develop your answer with explanations, examples, stories, things like that? For every part, you did a really good job with that. So full marks for coherence. Fluency is not speaking quickly or not speaking slowly, but really speaking without effort. Someone who is at a lower band, like a band 6 or a band 7 even, they will often be searching for the correct word to use or am I using the correct grammar structure? So they'll have a lot of audible pauses, like, things like that. And they'll also be trying to think of ideas. Because your English level is so high, you pretty much never had to do that. There was never any real pauses where I was like, oh, she doesn't really know that word, and she's trying to fetch that word from her brain. You spoke effortlessly about a range of different topics without any audible pauses, really. When I say without any audible pauses, I'm talking about unnatural audible pauses, because while I'm speaking now as a native English speaker and as an IELTS teacher, I'm pausing sometimes. That is natural. Unnatural is, as I just said, you're like thinking, oh, what's the way to say, to say this? You never do that. So for fluency and coherence, you would get a band 9. You would get full marks. So that's native English speaker level, which is very, very good. For pronunciation, there's 2 things that the examiner is thinking about pronunciation. The first is the most important, which is clarity. Can I understand everything that you're saying? And I could understand 100% of what you were saying. So first box is ticked. You have no problem in that area. The second is something called higher level pronunciation features. And those are things like intonation, as your voice goes up and your voice goes down naturally. Lower level students will speak very monotone like this. Everything is very flat, whereas native speakers will go up and down in order to convey meaning. I can understand 100% of what you're saying. You're using intonation at a very high level. You're using connected speech. You're using sentence stress, word stress, all very, very naturally, which allows me to understand you even more. A lot of people confuse a high pronunciation score with a British accent or an American accent or an Irish accent. The examiner is not really thinking about how British you sound or how American you sound. The examiner is thinking about the clarity of your speech. So you have an Indian accent, and you should be very proud of your Indian accent. But there's some people, when they speak with not just an Indian accent, but any accent, sometimes that accent will interfere with the listener's ability to understand what you're saying. At no point does your accent interfere with what you're saying. You are from India, and in India, you guys speak very, very quickly to each other. It's not a criticism. It's just naturally a lot of you guys do speak like that. Would you agree?
Yes, I totally agree with that. Yes.
And also being in a test situation, when we're nervous, we speak a little bit more quickly. Now, sometimes, especially with Indian students, when you combine the accent with speaking very, very quickly, that can sometimes cause a problem for the listener, but it doesn't with you. You're nervous a little bit sometimes, and you do speak a little bit quickly. If you were doing the test soon, I would suggest that that's the one thing that you would just be careful of, is if you go into the test very, very nervous and you speak really, really quickly, that could affect your pronunciation score slightly, but I don't think I'm being overly cautious with my feedback. You mixed up your v and w sounds a little bit. It's very common with German speakers, it's very common with Indian speakers, but it wasn't to the extent where I didn't understand what you were saying. For example, Spanish speakers will say video instead of video.
Right.
I watched a video on YouTube. Some German speakers will say I watched a video. Now that, if it was extreme, could lower your score, but you had just a very slight mix up between those two sounds. If every time you were trying to pronounce the, you said w, that would lower your score, because that is a systematic error that just keeps happening every time you use that sound. But it wasn't the case at all with you. So you would get a band 9 for pronunciation. The next is vocabulary. So there's two things that the examiner is thinking about when it comes to vocabulary. The first is accuracy. Did you use the correct words, basically, or are you getting words mixed up? So for example, you could say this is a phone, which is correct, or you could say this is an electronic device, which is correct, but phone would be a little bit more precise. But we wouldn't say that this is a sitting device. This is a chair. Or if you got these mixed up, it's like, I'm sitting on a phone. Like that is completely wrong. So you are using vocabulary correctly and precisely. Accuracy, you have no problems there. You're also using a lot of topic-specific vocabulary. Topic-specific vocabulary is, for example, to talk about phones, we would talk about a screen. We would talk about the resolution of that screen. We would talk about the memory and how many megabytes or gigabytes of the memory. But we couldn't use gigabytes to talk about a pen. For example, we couldn't talk about the resolution of a pen, but we would talk about ink, but we can't use the word ink to talk about phone. So these are very topic-specific words. As you can see, no matter what topic we ask you about, you are able to pull those topic-specific words, and that indicates that no matter what topic we ask you about, you will be able to talk about that topic. So that's the second thing, that's your range. So it's not like you can only talk about arriving late, but you can't talk about AI. You can talk about any topic. So the range of your vocabulary is very, very high, and the accuracy of your vocabulary is very, very high. So you get a band 9. Last but not least is grammar. So your grammar, again, is being assessed by accuracy and range. The range of your grammar is very good. You pick the most appropriate structures and tenses to use. So as you can see, what you do is you don't just answer every question with the present simple tense, for example. You use the appropriate tense, the appropriate structure to answer each question, which indicates you have a very wide range of grammar. Now, a lot of people think that to get a band 9 for grammar, the accuracy needs to be 100%, but that's not actually true. What it says in the official marking criteria is that you can have a few slips. Some examiners would listen to you and think, yeah, you made a few tiny little slips, like this one. However, under exam conditions, if you're stressed, you can often make little mistakes that you wouldn't normally make. And some examiners might think that you're making a few too many of these small grammatical errors. If that was the case, where they thought that you were making a few too many small grammatical errors, you would get a band 8, not a band 9 for grammar. But I think that you would be on the side of it just being a few slips where you would get a band 9. So I think overall, you probably would get a band 9. I think the lowest you would get would be an 8.5 overall, but I would be quite confident that you would get a band 9 if you had that performance.
Thank you.
Any questions?
No.
Well done.
Thank you so much.
So I hope you enjoyed this video. It was very, very long, but I hope that you will agree that it is going to really, really improve your speaking score. If you need more help with not just your speaking preparation, but your writing, your listening, your reading, this is my email address. We answer 100% of the emails that we receive. So if you just need a little bit of help, or you have a question, or you want to work with us, let us know via email and we will be back in touch with you. Or if you just want to continue on your journey with us here on YouTube, this video should help you out.